across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, good evening. Happy Wednesday to you all. Happy Hump Day, I think they say. Is that Hump Day today? Today it's the middle of the week and everyone just feels a little bit, But don't you worry, there's only 2 more days to go. And the weather's been, well, getting a bit better, hasn't it? Very English thing to do, you know, discussing what the weather forecast is like. Because let's face it, we got a lot of it. Right, so talking about dark skies, ominous clouds, the pressure keeps mounting on Starmer. And you know, you get to this one, we all find it interesting for about one day. We all like to watch someone squirm. We all think that Sir Keir Starmer is a ne'er-do-well. And actually, frankly speaking, on the whole list of his crimes he's committed against this country, Mandelson, I'd say, comes in about number 15. There's a whole host of other things I'd rather he resign for first. But I'm getting to the point now that I'm like, I never trusted him. I always thought he was duplicitous. I always thought he was tricksy. I always thought he doesn't like this country, is ill-suited to the job, has no policies that are going to benefit the nation, operates on a 2-tier system, you name it. I've had those views for a long period of time, and judging by the majority of polling, so has most of the country. So now, all of this going on and on and on and on and on, I'm beginning to get a bit weary of it, if I'm honest with you. And now it's like, well, he's got to come back and answer more questions in the Commons. Well, of course he has. And then he's going to be a typical barrister and find some sort of loophole or some sort of inadmissible evidence or, you know, a T that wasn't crossed or an I that wasn't dotted. The only people, frankly speaking, who can rid us of this troublesome Prime Minister is his own party. Only one, really, has put their head above the parapet and called for him to resign. Let's catch up on all the political latest with the brilliant Isabelle Oakeshott. Good evening, Isabelle. How are you?
Good evening. Well, what more is there to say about Mandelson and Starmer? I mean, I suppose, what does anyone care about now? It's really how long Keir Starmer is going to carry on staggering on as Prime Minister. And is there any chance of this man being ousted in the next couple of weeks? Or are we going to see some kind of prolonged drama in which he just insists on hanging on for as long as possible?
I mean, that is the big question. And I did find myself wondering what that would look like, because we've seen through various episodes now of calls for Prime Ministers to resign due to indiscretions or behaviours or performance. It's becoming a regular pattern, I think you might agree, in UK politics. And I've often wondered what would happen when people, you know, demanded that someone resigns, and when they just don't. Do we then just move on, forget about it? I mean, perhaps Starmer's going to be our test case in all of this.
Well, I mean, not really, because as you say, there have been so many cases which give us a sort of blueprint for what can happen. And the most extreme case is actually Boris Johnson, who refused to resign even though something like a dozen ministers and junior sort of aides quit to try to force him out. I mean, normally, it normally only takes, well, I say normally, I mean, I'm just going to give you the context that I've been reporting on prime ministers for about 20 years. So quite a lot of them, mostly under the Tories. There's a pretty big churn. I mean, normally, if there is one massive resignation, a very high up resignation, that is enough to seriously destabilize things. 2 cabinet minister resignations generally is likely to work, but not always, because that happened under Blair, I think. No, Brown, Gordon Brown, just before that 2010 general election. Labour backbenchers were desperate to get Brown out. They could see that Labour was heading for opposition and hoped that maybe if they replaced the sort of boring doer Gordon Brown with someone a bit more charismatic in the run-up to 2010, they would have a chance of seeing off David Cameron, who was obviously, you know, the sort of the young Tory opposition leader at the time. And that famously failed. Guy called James Pennell, who resigned from the cabinet a big spectacular kind of risk that he took, and it failed. And so it doesn't always work if cabinet ministers resign. So my point is, even supposing Ed Miliband resigned, or I don't know, one of the others that's limbering up, a guy called Al Cairns, who's not yet a household name, but is supposed to be very much on manoeuvres, doesn't necessarily mean that you get a Labour leader out if you do that. And Boris Johnson demonstrated this when multiple ministers resigned, and he's still stuck on in number 10. But eventually it did become an overwhelming number, and he was actually pushed out. And I think in the case of Starmer, if he doesn't go voluntarily, and I think we can be pretty sure he's not going to go voluntarily, it will come down to, is it tenable if you lose multiple ministers? If multiple ministers resign, can you somehow still style it out? And the answer is, recent history suggests yes.
I mean, I wonder, actually, because I'd heard murmurings probably about a year ago that Starmer wasn't enjoying the job, kind of would be happy to leave it. And I just wonder if this is a case of no point doing it ahead of local elections, wait until after, slope on off. I mean, if it was me, I'd think, why am I bothering? You know, I'm so unpopular. My party's turned against me. The civil service has turned against me, and quite rightly so. He's the loneliest Prime Minister in many respects. His cabinet probably aren't on his side anymore. The membership aren't on his side. And so I'd kind of think, well, I may as well just take the parliament, you know, the prime ministerial allowance I will get for the rest of my life and just go and, you know, be happy ever after.
Yeah, but Alex, you're a woman. You know, we're quite sensible about this stuff. We're quite pragmatic. And we also have what's known as moments of self-awareness and even self-doubt, where we think maybe, just maybe, someone might be able to do the job better than I can at this point. But can you think of many men that ever have those moments? Because there aren't very many of them, not in political history. And I can only think of one minister, one cabinet minister, that has ever resigned because she didn't think she was good enough. And that was way back, I think in the early 2000s, a minister called Estelle Morris, who resigned from the education department because she didn't think she was good enough. No one's ever done that ever since.
Way. Blimey, I've never heard of her. Clearly, she wasn't that good.
She went into the House of Lords, I think, and actually she was quite good. So, you know, again, it was rather a sweet thing. I think she was more than capable, and she just had some self-awareness, which most politicians don't.
Well, talking about self-awareness, something that I find quite extraordinary is all these sorts of puritanical, morally superior, self-righteous, because that describes the posture of many people on the left wing, people in the Labour Party who are now running around trying to defend the indefensible. And I think the bit that I find the most staggering is the idea that it is defensible that Starmer offered Lord Doyle, well, for making him a peer, you know, asked around to say, can we get him a nice, you know, cushy ambassadorial role? And there are people who say, well, that's normal. He's a friend. What? That's normal? Well, he's a friend?
I mean, there's so much of this, isn't there? Look at all the peerages that are dished out, you know, sometimes just completely undeserving people. You know, of course, there are certain peerages that are brilliant and they are given to experts who are brilliant people in their fields and add something to the House of Lords. But far too many are just baubles handed out to mates of the Prime Minister or leader of the opposition, returning favours, this, that or the other. I actually thought that was one aspect of what's his name's evidence yesterday, Ollie Robbins' evidence yesterday, that might not get as much attention as it deserves. But it has got quite a lot of political attention. Essentially, Ollie Robbins was saying just how awkward it was when basically the message was coming through from number 10. Can you find our mate Matthew Doyle a job? A nice cushy top diplomatic position. And Matthew Doyle's known to be very close to Peter Mandelson, and I think the impetus for this was coming from Mandelson, who clearly wanted his mates around him. And that was really awkward in the Foreign Office because Doyle, he doesn't have diplomatic experience. He's a Labour Party apparatchik. He's been around since I was reporting on the Blair years and years ago, and left when Blair left to work for the Blair Foundation, I think. So just a long-serving Labour kind of party bigwig, small wig, whatever, mini wig, because no one's really heard of him. But yeah.
But where's he gone? Where is Starmer? I mean, we saw him a little bit at PMQs today, which was sort of uncomfortable to watch, I suppose. But he's not really bothered addressing us. And I find that this is always his approach. He's not a prime minister who likes to get behind the lectern and actually explain to the very people he represents what is going on. The only time he likes to get behind a lectern is when he's there to chastise us.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to see any more of him? I'm not sure I actually do. I think we've seen, if anything, we've had more than enough of him this week. We had him at Prime Minister's Questions today. He once again totally failed to answer why he was supremely unbothered by Mandelson's links to a Kremlin, I think it's a Kremlin defense company of some sort of Kremlin-linked company. Given that Labour is constantly haranguing reform for almost entirely fictitious links to Putin, I say only almost entirely because there was that shameful case involving Nathan Gill, a former Brexit Party MEP who was convicted of taking bribes by some Russian Ukrainian. So we can't say everything's fictitious, but broadly, this is all a complete nonsense from Labour when they try to besmirch reform as being some kind of Putin sympathisers. Nothing could be further from the truth. And yet there they are inviting somebody who has commercial links, apparently, to the Kremlin to take the highest diplomatic position that we have to offer. And somehow or other, that's not regarded as worthy of any comment.
Well, no, this is what I agree with. And again, I feel like the legacy media, as they always do, completely miss the nub of this story, which is, I mean, for me, I want to keep pulling on this thread and finding out, not in terms of pointlessly cross-examining what he said in Parliament and when and all of that pantomime. I can't be bothered. I'm fed up. I find it boring. But what I do want someone to do is ask Sir Keir Starmer and the scary Lord Hermer quite what their relationships are with foreign governments, what they have been in the past, the clients they used to take on as barristers, the gap years spent in the USSR. That, to me, is well worth examining. I mean, you've done brilliant work on former prime ministers and got exclusives out there into the press, and the press have gone absolutely cockapoo for it. You know, they've gone mad. They've loved it. David Cameron, the pig's head. But with Starmer, they have this sort of overwhelming lack of curiosity as to his past, as to some of these appointments. He's surrounded himself by his own personal chumocracy, many of which seem to have really suspicious ties with foreign governments. And this lot sitting there, by and large, most of them in the lobby and at, 4 Millbank, the political studio shared by all the broadcasters, don't seem to think that's of any pertinence. They don't seem to be asking those questions at all.
Well, I think there's a lot still to be uncovered in relation to the ill-fated Chagos Island surrender. When it emerged that that deal is now on hold, I'm not sure if it's officially been kind of abandoned, the great giveaway for which we all have to pay billions of pounds. But there were a few headlines about it during the height of the drama over the Middle East conflict. How very convenient for the government, because it meant that there hasn't been that much coverage of the latest twists and turns in the tale. That whole sell-off has never really made any sense to anyone. And it's that whole thing, when you don't understand something, follow the money. There is money there. There are backhanders there, I'm sure of it. I'm not sure who's taking what for doing what, but undoubtedly there are UK players involved in that shady deal who stood or have already made many millions out of it. And nobody has ever quite cracked that story. I hope that somebody is able to get to the heart of it.
Do you know what, Isabel? I have been constantly trying to twist the arm of the people I know in America in senior positions saying, do you know what? When everything's calmed down with Iran, you guys, the Congress, need to subpoena all of the files surrounding the Chagos Islands, demand to see, because it's also their airbase, demand to see who said what, minutes of every meeting, the deals, who was working on it, what their connections are, subpoena the lot of it. Make people come to Congress and explain, because we might learn a thing or two.
I really think we would. And I think that this one's on Starmer. You know, he's the one that has driven this through. I know the Tories started it. They absolutely never needed to. But Starmer is the one that's driven it through, that put the price tag on, the price tag that we, the taxpayer, are supposedly going to be forced to shell out. I think reformers said if they get into power, they will tear up the deal anyway. You know, it will not stand. It's null and void. They've put everybody, all parties on notice about that. But nonetheless, so much more to uncover on that. I'm not quite sure how we've gone off on the Chagos tangent, but it's such a fascinating story.
It's the common denominator with all of this stuff. Every time I look at all of it, because, you know, you were talking then about this allegation that the right wing and Brexit has all been infiltrated by Russia. They love pushing this narrative. And yet you really don't have to be particularly imaginative to look at all of the incidents where the left wing, not just in the UK, but frankly across the Western world, seem to be right up the posterior of Mr. Xi Jinping. And this Labour Party, you know, that they're on account. Why have we not heard any more about the husband of the Labour MP who was arrested for being a Chinese agent? Barry Gardiner accepting £500,000 in donations from a woman whose son he then hired in his office, who was a Chinese agent. 6 ministerial visits in the first 6 months to China. Again, the common denominator with the Chagos Islands, China. Mandelson, China. It's always China, the mega embassy. You just name it. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. The time that the case against the three people who are allegedly, the two men actually, who are allegedly spying for China collapsed. Why? Because Jonathan Powell and the government wouldn't say that China was a threat to national security. Peter Mandelson going for, you know, lovely little supper with George Osborne. I wonder what they were discussing. Oh, maybe it was China. China comes up every single time, around every single bend when it comes to the Labour Party. I'm pretty damn certain that that is a hostile foreign state. Donald Trump has just intercepted one of their boats heading to Iran with some sort of special cargo for Iran, which doesn't sound particularly great. We know that the Chinese have been helping the Russians, possibly helping even to geolocate Western bases that Iran and Russia can target with missiles. China is not to be trusted. China are behind a lot of the sort of inorganic top-down activism that seems to come our way, whether it be on trans stuff or BLM. Oh, it's lots of seed companies set up funding these organisations, extremely clever, curated farms of bots. All the time, the common denominator is China. And this government couldn't do any more for that country than it's already doing, rather than just roll out the red carpet and say, would you like us instead of Taiwan?
I mean, it's so weird, isn't it? It's as if somehow China is the acceptable hostile state. You know, the Russians are all horrendous, and that's true. I agree. You know, Putin is a monster. But somehow or other, the Chinese regime is the acceptable face of hostile rogue statery. I don't think so. In fact, China is probably doing more evil to us on any given moment in terms of industrial scale espionage, you know, the stealing of our propriety information, intellectual property, trying to undermine our stuff, sending their delegates to our defence conferences, any number of other things, trying to plant a super embassy in the heart of our capital city, on and on. You know, they've got the capability to really do us a great deal of damage. They're much too smart to be doing it very, very flagrantly. But in your long list of whatabouteries, you know, all the scandals that have happened under this Prime Minister, who's only been in power, by the way, for less than 2 years, you actually forgot about Tulip Siddiq, the anti-corruption minister, wanted for extradition to Bangladesh on corruption charges.
No, it's astonishing. And, you know, when it comes to China, I find it absolutely amazing that they got off completely scot-free when it came to the pandemic. I mean, You were
And
doing
that-
what in your
yes.
laboratory? And then it escaped. And then you claim nothing. And then you tell everyone's got to lock themselves in. You didn't give over any information that could have helped create a cure or let the world know what we're dealing with. Basically totaled the world economy. Loads of people died. Multiple businesses collapsed. Lots of international debt. Our government's up to its eyeballs in debt. Why China? China!
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Anyway, we've come a long way from Keir Starmer and his woes. But yes.
We have indeed. Right, anyway, let's take that opportunity then to have a little break and move on to matters new, because I'm fed up with talking about Mandelson, if I'm honest with you. And thankfully, Isabelle has got a brilliant exclusive for us, so you don't need to go anywhere. Pour yourself a three-fingered gin and tonic, and we're going to be getting Isabelle's lovely gift of brilliant journalism just after this.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Ah, lovely Belgium. How I miss it not. Of course, I lived there for a good 3.5 years, something like that. My lovely good friend Paul Cox has just gone over there now, and I did warn him. I said, just you wait, it's become a bit messy. Lots of graffiti, lots of migrants sleeping in the metro station. But where else might they sleep when they're not in the metro station? Well, Isabelle has conducted a brilliant report. Tell us more about it, Isabelle.
So while we were researching the new launch points for asylum seeker dinghies coming to the UK, which are leaving from Belgium beaches, as you and I were discussing yesterday, we were amazed to be able to basically walk in to a asylum seeker accommodation centre in Flanders, so quite near those beaches where the boats take off. And it didn't require any subterfuge. You know, you can't just walk into asylum seeker hotel accommodation or facilities in the UK. As people know, there's always like high fences all around them and all these burly security guards, and no one's allowed to see behind closed doors. But we were actually just invited in. by some of the very friendly asylum seekers. And the big shock, Alex, the really big shock was that the accommodation that asylum seekers are being kept in Belgium is no better than what you find in a British jail. I mean, I've researched this properly. I've been in British jails as a journalist, not as an inmate, I'm happy to say, not yet. And I've also looked at quite a lot of images on what I can find online about accommodation. What are the cells like in different categories of prison? I mean, what these asylum seekers in Belgium are living in is basic in the extreme. You know, they are 8 to a room, and they are in sort of partitioned, it's like a dormitory with sort of drawback curtains between the beds. And really, there's not much room for more than the sort of metal camp bed style bed and a tiny little bedside table in their little cubbies. And they are served daily the same old slop versus what our lot gets, which is, we're just showing some images now, you know, very varied fare, served out of silver style tureens. They get 3 meals a day, asylum seekers typically in British asylum seeker hotels, plus, by the way, pretty much unlimited snacks, and it's really high-end stuff. Whereas these guys, they just get the same old very, very, very basic survival rations. Their accommodation's not inhumane. Nor were they particularly kind of complaining about it. I mean, the asylum seekers that we spoke to had been there for over 2 years in these conditions. So clearly the conditions are not intolerable. And the prize that they seek, which is permission to stay in Belgium, is worth staying in those conditions for. But I think it seriously begs the question why the UK government feels the need to provide so many luxuries for asylum seekers in the UK when other countries, EU countries, you know, the ones that normally take the moral high ground and are signed up to all the, you know, international treaties and all of that, are just providing very, very simple Spartan conditions. And I should add that whilst our asylum seekers in the UK get all manner of free stuff, and people, our listeners, our viewers will have heard a lot about it, you know, the free fast track NHS care, the free toiletries, the free this, the free that, the free entertainment. They also get in the UK £49 a week to spend on luxuries. They don't need to spend much on anything.
£45 a week?
£49 a week.
So that's basically 200 quid a month on, and they've got all their food and accommodation, everything paid for. There are families in Britain who don't have that.
So what do they get in Belgium? Well, they get €9 a week. So I'm just saying that I think this just blows a hole in the whole system in the UK, because there is no need to gold plate it to this extent. You know, our European allies, supposed allies, are not doing this.
No.
They are putting asylum seekers in dormitories in which even toilet roll is not to be taken for granted. Why do they do that? Because they're sensible enough to realise that if you provide luxury hotels like the one we're showing on the screen just now, that is simply going to act as a pull factor and draw more people over to the UK.
Oh, make it make sense.
I share your despair. Oh.
I mean, look, having lived in Brussels, I've seen for myself that there are plenty of asylum seekers who aren't even in that accommodation. They open their train stations, they keep them open throughout the night for people to be able to sleep rough. It's a dreadful place these days, Belgium. It is. It's horrible. Brussels is one of the most horrible cities. That it was bad when I lived there, but COVID ravaged it, and this sort of mass illegal migration has basically finished it off. There's a few pretty parts of the city, but the rest of it is ghoulish. But at the same time, it sort of suggests that they're not really messing about when it comes to asylum seekers, because you see a lot of them out on the streets. Isabelle, excellent reporting as per always. Thank you ever so much for bringing that lovely little exclusive gift to us. Right, now, we did, of course, contact the Security and Asylum Minister, a man who goes by the name of Alex Norris. He said hotels were meant to be a short-term stopgap under the previous government, but they spiralled out of control, costing taxpayers billions and dumping the consequences on local communities. You've been in office for 2 years. At some point, you've got to stop blaming the previous administration. You're about halfway through your term at this point, son. You've got to let it go, mate. It's been under your control now for 2 years. Right, on that note, let's take a short breather, shall we? If you want to comment on any of the things we're talking about today, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to send a WhatsApp message, 0344 499 1000. You can also leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send a text message. Write the word talk before you send your text. And if you want to be so brave as to hear your voice on the airwaves, we'd love to hear from you as well. Especially maybe if you've never called before. Yeah, I'm talking about you. You've thought about it. You got close one day and then you thought, it's not really for me. I think it is. 0344 499 1000. Right, we'll see you on the other side of this short commercial break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Let's do a couple of messages before we move on. Hi, Alex. We are finally getting an opposition that we've all been calling for, holding the Prime Minister to account for his lies. Kemi is gaining back votes for Conservatives. Farage can't even be bothered to attend PMQs, says Becca. I think Kemi, as official leader of the opposition, is definitely making hay while the sun shines. That is for sure. She's this whole furore and the opportunity to try and skewer Starmer at Prime Minister's questions is without doubt working in her favour. Rob from Burnley says, unless some definitive proof comes out in the coming weeks, Starmer will dig his heels in. He's propped up by a lot of useful idiots who wouldn't be anywhere near 100,000 per annum if out in the private sector. I can see him giving a speech at this year's Labour conference in the autumn and getting heckled like some dictator. And Robbie says, Alex, I have wondered for months if Starmer could be a Russian asset. He is constantly destroying all the Western freedoms I've lived my whole life with. The special relationships gone trial by jury on his way out. The special relationship gone trial by jury on his way out. Labour members expelled from the party for being charged with vote rigging. He's done more damage than the Cambridge spy ring of 1940 to 1950. I'll tell you, you're forgetting actually as well that acts of national sabotage being committed by Red Ed, destroying our oil wells and so forth. That's literally the sort of thing that Russia's doing to Ukraine, that Donald Trump was going to do to Iran before people like Red Ed Miliband said that would be committing a war crime targeting infrastructure, civilian infrastructure and energy infrastructure. I'm like, you are a walking war crime, you stupid little man. OK, right. No wonder this next story is what it is. That is, half of all young people said they would never take up arms for the UK. Asked whether they'd be willing to go to war for Britain, 50% of those aged 16 to 29 said that under no circumstances. Only 38% said they would under some circumstances. The rest didn't know. Well, here's the thing. When war comes, very often you don't get a choice, you sad, sad little children. Let's speak now to Philip Kisserly, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. The point is this. I mean, I worry about the younger generations because not only are they lily-livered, self-indulgent, all too often weak, directionless, the first people to run after vain, indulgent policies like free Palestine. They also are really thick. Because the idea, when they go, oh, well, would you go to war for Britain? They go, no, under no circumstances. It's a bit like, OK, right. So when we got streets full of troops stomping up and down, taking your mother hostage, bombing your next door neighbour, and the government suddenly needs young men and young women to join the cause, you probably aren't going to be asked whether or not you want to.
Hello, Alex. It's great to see you.
Hello.
Brilliantly put. Let's not forget that this generation of young people have been on the receiving end of poisonous identity politics at primary school, secondary school, further education, higher education. They are taught that Britain is evil. They are taught that whiteness is the source of all the problems in the world. They are taught that everybody else, the invading armies, are lovely and beautiful and we deserve it and we are just terrible. So they've been on the receiving end of all of that all of their lives. So they're different to any other generation. But the entitlement is just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, the unwritten part of that is, well, somebody else will fight for us. I'm not going to fight for them. You know what I mean? I'm too old. I want them to fight for me. Second thoughts, looking at them, no, I don't. Now, so it's all of this kind of entitlement thing, and they're saying that, oh, well, Britain doesn't work for us because, we can't get on the property ladder, we can't get jobs with very good pay, and we're frightened of AI. Those are the three big things that come out of this. Now, I don't know how that relates to not fighting for Britain. I'm frightened of AI, therefore I won't fight for Britain. It's nonsense. So it isn't about the things they say it's about.
Okay. I mean, this is the other thing. Let's be fair. These people who are aged, let me clarify, 16 to 29, when asked about which political leader best represented British values, half of them couldn't even name any of the current political leaders. Half of them couldn't even name a political leader in the UK. And then this is the other mad thing. They're like, oh, I'm worried. I can't afford to buy a house. I still got to live with my parents. Haven't got a job I like. It's so terrifying. No one's doing anything for me. There they are all moaning. And then 66% say they want to pay reparations for former colonies. You don't think the government's got enough money to pay for you to have a house? No, great, I know. Let's send a giant charity check to Jamaica, you utter numbskulls.
Well, not only are they passive, they are passively stupid as well. And that is the problem. And again, they are different to every other single generation. They say that we've got it worse than every other single generation. That is empirically not correct. By every measurement, they do not have it worse. They have it much better. The difference between this lot and every other generation is every other generation went out and made it for themselves, right? If they had problems, if they didn't have opportunities, they damn well went out and made opportunities, okay? This lot wouldn't know how to do it because they've been mollycoddled all of their lives. But I come back to that other main point. They've been taught, they've been indoctrinated. They They do not know how to think. They have no criticality. That is the problem. And it comes down to the education system. It comes down to the broader culture. We have created this little monster, and we probably need to do something about it so we don't create other little monsters further down the years.
But this is the thing. It isn't just, like you said, it's not just the education system. It is culture in general.
It's the broader culture,
when so many, plot lines in soaps or films being released, or, it's just all radical left-wing propaganda all the time.
But it's also laziness as well. There's a culture of laziness. You only have to look at the benefits culture in this country, right? There is generally a culture of laziness rather than kind of, oh, I feel a bit stressed. That's probably quite a good thing because it means I'm living and I'm really kind of getting out there and trying to achieve and trying to make my mark in the world. No, I'm feeling stressed, so I'm going to go to bed and cry. That's the difference, right? And that's what we have. That is a major problem in this country. And I think that went on steroids after COVID. Everybody was locked down and something changed massively, okay? And it's all the identity politics stuff, it's the BLM stuff, it's the worshipping the NHS, but there's something fundamentally lazy and this victimhood culture as well. I could talk about this for hours, because I spent 25 years in the education system. I saw it all firsthand, but they were mollycoddled and they were encouraged to be victims. And one of the reasons they're encouraged to be victims, Alex, is that it's easier to deal with victims in some ways. Okay, it's much tougher to deal with people who are going out asking questions, doing difficult things. You can't control them. It's easier to control some little moron who stays in bed all day.
No, I agree with you. Now, let's talk about something else which is happening. And again, it's this sort of the hypocritical nature of our society, the two-tier systems, which is apparently landlords are illegally advertising for tenants across London and the South East by putting posts on platforms such as Facebook, Gumtree, Telegram, social media in general, are saying things like they want Muslims only. There's others which say we only want Punjabi speakers or Gujarati speakers or Keralans. But largely there seems to be a lot saying we only want Muslims. I mean, you can understand that if there's a couple of Muslim people in a house already and want to let out the spare room, that might be preferred. But the point is, this is illegal under the law. But it also, to me, is a clear indication of the thing that has gone most wrong in this country, which is also, can I just say, very normal for humans as a race. When I lived in China, guess what? I ended up living with a load of other UK expats who spoke English and spent all my time with them. And we used to go to a place called Windows in Shanghai, which kind of resembled a British pub. Because that's what we do. Guess what? That is what humans are conditioned to do. But this is happening now at a radical pace across the UK. It's already happened to so many of the old mill towns and mining towns. It's happening in all of our big cities that we are becoming totally balkanised.
And this is, I saw this story today and it took me right back, well, actually before my childhood, to the 60s and 70s, but my understanding of that time. Okay, and it was, no Irish, no blacks, no dogs, which used to be on buildings for people renting. Landlords wouldn't have those. And now it's no Jews, no infidels, no dogs. You know what I mean? We've gone full circle. And I chose those categories very carefully. We've gone full circle, and it's absolutely unacceptable. But the left are completely silent about this. If this was any other group, if this was obviously, it's the obvious thing to say, but I'm going to say it. If this was, if this was white people saying no Muslims.
If I said I got a spare room in my house and I'm looking for a really nice tenant, I want them to be a white Christian, I would have the police over at my front door. It would make front pages of national newspapers. I'd be cancelled, vilified, attacked. It would be considered, the worst thing since Hitler.
Yeah, but the difference here is this isn't people inviting people into their own homes as lodgers. These are just landlords with properties all over the country. So I mean, if they want, I'm half tempted to say, look, if you want segregation, right? let's go down that route, and you can have it and see how you like it.
And what are we going to give him?
Right, so you
Birmingham.
don't get access to education because you don't want it. It's English, it's white, you don't want that. You don't have access to welfare, okay? If you want segregation, this is where we go, okay? So this is a horrible road to go down. This is the most un-British, anti-Western, it's anti-democratic, it's all of those things. This balkanization, which we've seen certainly over the last 10 years in this country, is really frightening. But what's more frightening to me is the fact that the usual suspects, you know, the so-called progressive left, all of those lovely liberals in public sector jobs, they are silent on this. They are not saying a damn thing. And it's the same thing, like they never said anything about the Pakistani rape gangs. You know, like they never say anything about the as you said before, the actual balkanization of northern towns like this one here. All of that stuff. It's so exhausting. We can see our society, our culture, the people, our cities really going to the dogs, and the people who should be standing up, the anti-racists, are doing nothing about it whatsoever.
No, I agree with you entirely, Philip. It's just, we're in a pretty dark situation. All those people saying they don't want to fight in a war, well, they might have to if we keep going down this road. Philip, always so good to speak to you, my darling. Philip Kisserly there, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Got big yellow capital letters writing on my screen. Was that you, James, or was that Dean nagging me on my screen? That's you, James. So James is producing me. He's going to become Peter Cardwell's producer. And so poor lamb, he's having to test his skills on me with no one other than brilliant Liver supposedly watching over him. Yeah, doing a good job there, aren't you, Dean? But anyway, James has put viewer calls and texts. Give the number a shout out. OK, 03444991000. See, I'm like Pavlov's dog. That's the number to call, to text 8722. Write the word talk before you text. Now, he's also put open brackets, maybe worth mentioning why you have a pen in your hair. It's getting a lot of attention in our audience messages. Do you know what? I always used to do this when I was a cub reporter at ITV. I always used to keep pens in my ponytail. It's a good place as a woman to keep them. I didn't know I had one in there. But there was this one time I did a piece to camera when I was an ITV reporter, and I looked at myself, and I looked like the blimmin' Statue of Liberty I'd taken off the stationery from the newsroom in my bumps. Anyway, there you go. That is why I didn't realise it. It's because I was sitting in the sunshine doing a cryptic crossword earlier. There it is. That's the one. There it is. Do you know, women out there, the women of the universe with their ponytails, take it from me. This is a great place to keep a pen. Just saying. You can call it the Alex. Test it out one day. Right, OK, we're going to take a short break now. And, of course, I want you to give me a call. We already gave you those details, but I'll do it again. 03444991000. It's your normal network rate. Angie is messaging, hey, Alex, I probably missed it at some point, but why is Cardi P off? Is he OK? I think he's OK, and I don't know, actually. I didn't inquire. He's fine, and he's back on Monday. There you go. I don't know why he's off, but, you know, people can do other things and take holidays, or don't think he's under the weather. We wish him well, whatever he's up to. Hopefully cooling his heels, enjoying a bit of, doing academic commitments. Is that right? Well, that's kind of smart and fancy, isn't it? But there you go. He's off because he's got academic commitments, and that's OK. Little old Alex was here to keep the seat warm while we await for his return. Right, let's speak to some of you just after this.
the handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, how are you doing? Right, shall we do some calls and some messages regarding pens in the hair? Someone's message, very important indeed. Oh, yeah, sorry, I've done all three, haven't I? I do like it, though. I think it's sort of whimsical, a bit 90s. If you visit the Works or a shop like that, you'll find pens with a fake jewel on the end or a metallic one with a pearl on the end. Your pens will look like hairpins. That's what, you know what, I need I need sort of exciting pens with like dealy boppers and little widgety mechanical toys and things like that. That would look really good. Okay, let's do some calls. Let's speak to Donald, who, Donald, I don't know if I want to speak to you.
Hello.
You're in Spain, aren't you?
I'm in Tenerife.
Oh, man, Donald. Why? Why do you have to have a better life than us? Why?
Because I saw the light and I bought an apartment over here and sold my house in UK.
Oh, man, you know I love the Canary Islands. I am jealous to the back teeth right now. Well, good for you, can I just say, Donald?
I must tell you, I am a Lancastrian born and bred.
Oh, well, you know, you can still love your homelands, but be wise enough to move out of them right now. I must admit, you know, my long-term ambition is to just buy a nice little finca in Lanzarote in the middle of volcanoes where no one will find me. Just be a little troglodyte with my, you know, what is that lovely, there's like a sort of, what is it? Not like barnacles they love over there. Maybe that's just a Lanzarote thing. It's not a barnacle, it's a... Anyway, they're nice. What's it? Limpets! Limpets, that's it. I could just survive on limpets and, you know, a bit like John the Baptist. Right, what's on your mind, Donald?
Well, I gave those up for Lent. Right, what's on my mind? I was listening to your programme earlier on.
Yeah.
And the chap was talking about the young people who would not defend Britain. And I was horrified.
Yeah, I mean, it's... I wonder if people asked people back in the 1930s, would you fight for your country? What percentage of young people would have automatically said yes?
In 1954, February 1954, bear in mind, I was in the Combined Cadet Force at school. I got a letter from Her Majesty's government, and I was conscripted. And I joined the Loyal Regiment, which is a Lancashire regiment, which I was proud of. And I did my 2 years. I went in for 28 shillings a week.
Wow.
And when I passed my sniper's test, it went up to £4, 4 shillings.
Wow.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Went abroad twice. Went on a peacekeeping mission to Trieste, and then went on it was a Ministry of Defence move to see how quickly they could move. It was a time of Suez, just before it started, to see how quickly they could move a platoon of men within jumping distance of Suez.
Wow.
And I tell you, I loved every minute of that. And also I had to go was it, I think it was about 12 months after, I'd got to do another month's retraining. Leave my job and go. I loved it. I tell you, I loved it. And I wanted to be a policeman. I was a police cadet when I left school. When I came out of the army, I wasn't tall enough. So
Yeah.
I had to think again. I was fortunate enough to get a job selling steel for steel stockholders,
Wow.
finishing up as the general manager of a company in Blackburn, Lancashire.
Well, look at that. You've had a right old varied life, Donald. Now you've wound up, rightfully so, putting your feet up in Tenerife. But it is interesting. I don't really know what we do about young people. I think the thing is, they don't really know what this country is anymore. The idea of statehood is foreign to them. They're told they shouldn't like it. They're kind of, most of them, unfit. They're weak. They are pampered.
But I didn't get a choice.
Yeah, well, no,
I was
that's the
told
thing,
by
isn't
the
it?
government that I had to go.
That is exactly the point, Donald. The point that I was making, and someone else has written this as well. They've basically said, have they not seen what happened in Ukraine? Here we go. It's Ernie. The British youth who say they won't fight for Britain have obviously not seen videos on the internet of the Ukrainian and Russian military dragging anyone of fighting age off the streets and bundling them into military trucks and sending them straight to the front line. That is the thing. When war happens, you don't get to have a little option of, do I want war? Do I not want war? Maybe I'll just stay at home and watch Netflix. Really? I don't think people understand what modern warfare's like. They really don't. Donald, thank you ever so much for everything you've done for this country, and enjoy your well-earned retirement, my friend. Let's speak now to Simon in Northamptonshire. Hi, Simon.
Hello, Alex. My thing I just wanted to raise, it's about the obvious topic of Starmer. There's the contradiction in his position for a man that keeps going on. He's a forensic lawyer. He's all across the detail, and he keeps hammering on about the process being followed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, if you're so happy to cling to that as an excuse when the process was going to be overridden, it was very clear this was a shoo-in. They wanted Mandelson. I just don't credit him as being anyone that I'd pay money to defend me if he's like, right, we didn't follow the process, so that will be the argument I'm going to stick to. That's my defence.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. The thing is, Starmer is just playing to his own strengths, which is loopholes, process, mitigations, but never honesty. That seems to me his Achilles heel. Simon, thank you ever so much for your call. I'm afraid we're going to have an advert break now, because top of the hour has to be bang on, but don't go anywhere, because there's still 2 more hours of fun-packed, factual content to come.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
There we go. We're with Donald in Tenerife right now, aren't we? Right, yeah? Having your mojito, Donald, are you? Enjoying a nicer, lovely orange sunset over the vista. Yeah, I wish I was with you, if I'm honest with you. A bit chilly out there still. I mean, I went out to sit in the sunshine and do crosswords earlier, and I ended up having to mummify myself in the free blankets outside the establishment where I was sitting. It's one of those sort of like, you know, it looks really sunny and it gives you a false sense of comfort. And when you're in direct sunshine, you're like, ooh, I could bask in this. And then the minute it dips behind a cloud, it's like, oh my goodness, prevent the hypothermia at all costs. Right, now, we're going to have a slight change of plan. That's right, because there's been a little bit of breaking news, some newish news, which has been dumped on the front page of the Telegraph's website. I spy with my little eye something called "We Hate Lord Hermer." And I thought, well, that's too irresistible. Well done, my production team, for spotting that. And so we're just going to throw Ben Habib in at the deep end with this, because I've decided that this is well worth bumping up the schedule. Ben, how are you doing, my darling?
I'm very well. I haven't read this breaking news.
Neither have I. So I'm going to, on behalf of all of us here right now, I'm going to basically let you know what it's all about. So, as you are probably well aware, our Attorney General, an appointment, not an elected official, a man who was given a peerage by his chum Starmer in order that he could just directly appoint him to the highest legal office in the land, as you probably know, seemed to spend most of his legal career going after UK governments, trying to get, you know, compensation for terrorists. But most notoriously, one of the things that Hermer did was pursue a witch hunt against British troops, particularly those who fought in the Middle Eastern wars. That's right, the wars that the Labour Party themselves seem to think were a good idea to be part of. And actually, a lot of this work was also done pro bono, which kind of shows the nature of somebody when they want to go after UK troops and UK government for free. Oh, because it seems like a nice thing to do. Well, here we go. Apparently, he pursued a notorious witch hunt against British troops, despite being warned that the allegations were lies, that the things people were saying that these troops did in Iraq were just not true. The Telegraph say an investigation by the Telegraph can reveal the Attorney General's leading role in the Al-Swedi scandal, which left decorated war heroes facing false accusations of murder and torture for more than a decade. Emails and legal documents show Sir Keir Starmer's closest cabinet ally acted as lead counsel in civil claims against the Ministry of Defence and pressed for lucrative compensation, despite mounting evidence that his 8 Iraqi clients were on the make. The Attorney General later insisted it made no difference whether his clients were a saint or a member of Al-Qaeda, while suing British troops under human rights laws. I have been saying this. I know that the Telegraph think that's exclusive and brand new information. I did write about it on my own Substack about a month ago, but there you have it. If this man was going to be vetted, right, in the same way we're all, you know, laying eggs over whether or not Lord Mandelson was fit to be American ambassador, how is this utter cretin, an enemy of the state, as far as I can see from his back catalogue of hobby horses that he took on as a creepy human rights barrister, unelected, directly appointed by Starmer? Why is he not being vetted? The man, as far as I can tell, is an enemy of this country and now holds the highest legal office in the land.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, Lord Hermer, as you started off by saying, Alex, he wasn't elected. He was appointed by Starmer, and in order to appoint him, he ennobled Hermer to get him into office. And Hermer, one of the first things Hermer did was, of course, Chagos, which was to try and promote the giving away of strategic British territory to a power that is associated with China. The second thing he tried to do was to change the Conservative Party's Legacy Act, which you might recall was the Act of Parliament the Conservatives put in place to prevent any claims being made against British troops for their actions in Northern Ireland. He tried to change the provisions of that so that Gerry Adams, one of his former clients, could bring a case against the British government for compensation for the arrest that he suffered, or the fact that he was arrested in 1974, or I can't remember the exact year, but in the 1970s. Hermer tried to change the law to give Gerry Adams the right to sue the British government. Then the Labour Party set aside the Legacy Act. Now they're coming out with something called the Troubles Bill, which will become the Troubles Act when it comes into force, which will allow effectively people to bring cases against former British military who were doing their job in Northern Ireland. Yep. We've given a complete amnesty to the terrorists. We've ushered them into high office in Northern Ireland, and we are now going to change the law so that actions can be brought against former British officers and member of the military.
It's such, Ben, I'm about to send a chill down your spine, because I'm reading even more, and they have got more information that I didn't have in my own Substack, and it's scary. Brace yourself for this. Brace yourself. So these compensation cases centred around claims brought by Iraqis who alleged British troops had tortured and executed civilians in southern Iraq in 2004. Now, bear in mind what I said earlier, where Hermer said it doesn't matter whether his clients were a saint or a member of Al-Qaeda. Well, who were these clients in the £31 million case? Well, actually, there ended up being a public inquiry that ruled the allegations were deliberate lies. Who were these clients of Lord Hermer, who said they were innocent farmers and labourers? No, they were an insurgent Islamist group. And guess who they were working for? The IRGC. The IRGC, for crying out loud. For crying out loud. So I knew this bit, that he had been working alongside a guy called Phil Shiner, who was struck off for fraud, later convicted. And looking at this, Hermer was involved in this case for nearly a decade, working directly alongside Phil Shiner, that I knew about, and another leading human rights solicitor called Martin Day. He attempted to secure taxpayer-funded settlements, us, me, you, everyone listening, paying terrorists connected to the IRGC for made-up lies about our British troops. And he's our Attorney General. This man should be nowhere near anything to do with government. He should be in a blimmin' prison cell.
He should be, 100%. The man is anti-British, and the individual who appointed him, Starmer, should equally be held to account.
Yes.
They obviously knew. Starmer must know what Hermer is. Starmer knew what Mandelson was, and yet they keep doing it. They just think by looking into the camera as he does, in my mind, as a rabbit caught in the headlights, that he'll somehow get the British public to believe his nonsense. But Starmer has been proved to be a liar. Lord Hermer is anti-British. He's done so many things that is against this country's interest. But the other thing I just want to quickly mention is when British troops go into combat, they have very strict rules of engagement. They do not do anything which they're not allowed to do. They take instructions continuously from senior officers all the way up. They don't get into firefights without consent from their senior officers. And so for people to then judge them years later from the comfort of an armchair and a socialist Fabian disposition, a hatred of all things British, condemning them, as I say, years later, is absolutely abhorrent. Why would anyone join our military if they think that having done their job, they will be held to account? Not held to account. They will be thrown under a bus.
But I'm more concerned about the motivations of this sick, evil, perverted little man. Now, listen, let's talk about Hermer's response to this, because in response about took questions about the press conference, a spokesman for the Attorney General said Lord Hermer did a small amount of work at the start of this case. Oh, yeah, only a decade's worth, where he made clear that serious allegations at the time needed further investigation. The attorney argued it'd be unfair on armed services personnel if they didn't have the opportunity to show their innocence for a proper investigation. But I'm sorry, the information doesn't really back that up. A witness statement said he became substantially involved in the case of 2008. Documents show he was acting on a conditional fee arrangement, i.e. no win, no fee, meaning he chose to take on this case. It wasn't foisted upon him. Well, we better give these soldiers an opportunity to defend themselves. He was salivating. He was chomping at the bits to do this. And then, but get this, doubts about the claimant's account surfaced almost immediately. Within 1 week of him taking this case on, Hermer received an internal document from his instructing solicitors warning that some of the claims were implausible. The document highlighted inconsistencies in their accounts. And yet, there he is. Hermer really wanted to take this case on, wanted to get money out of us, the British taxpayers, to hand to Islamists who are working for the IRGC and meanwhile almost render us totally defenceless, because thereafter British soldiers in the theatre of war will be terrified to ever discharge their weapon. The man, like I said, I'm barely sweating anymore about Mandelson being the American ambassador. That was just a bozo move. Hermer and that chumocracy appointment, unelected. Apparently, if you're a minister, you don't necessarily have to be vetted. This man, as far as I can tell, is the worst thing that's ever happened to Great Britain.
He is.
And he's at the top of the legal tree, and it's terrifying.
He's really awful. Hermer is a disgusting individual. The people he's represented in the past, they often say, well, everyone's entitled to justice. We've got to represent those who are given to us to defend, and so on and so forth. But if you look at his track record, all he's done is defend people who have done damage to this country. And then he makes proactive attempts to change the law to make it possible for other people, as I said, Jerry Adams and others, to have a go at the country, to have a go at us. How is it that we could have an attorney general who is so damaging to British national interests? And I'm afraid it goes straight back to Starmer again, Alex. Starmer is the guy who's overseeing this. Starmer is the guy, no matter how innocent he might try to make himself look, no matter how much he denies it, no matter how much he says, I hold myself to a much higher account than other people are. I feel more wretched than anyone could imagine, and so on and so forth. Starmer is the guy who is at the center of all of this. And he needs to go. But the other sad thing to say is that if Starmer goes, we're just going to get another lunatic who's as bad as Starmer, if not worse. There isn't a single individual in the cabinet that I can point to and say, I trust them, with it to a degree. I don't trust any of them.
And I think most of them are useless as well. But at the moment, if you look at what Hermer has done, and Starmer worked with him, that's his mate. It's not that he was the most qualified MP with legal qualifications that made him suitable, therefore, to become the Attorney General. He wasn't anywhere near Parliament or politics. He was picked by Starmer, who knew exactly the sort of cases that he worked on, because Starmer worked on them too. They were long-term friends. And so what is Starmer doing, picking this man, unless Starmer sympathises, unless Starmer loves the fact that he seemed to spend his life haranguing the British military,
100%.
haranguing the British government and siding with hostile regimes and terrorists. I mean, at this stage, I kind of think the two of them should be in the Tower of London for treason.
I absolutely agree. They should certainly not be, respectively, Prime Minister and Attorney General. I mean, we don't need to go through Hermer's other indiscretions, but he's the one who's been promoting the Caribbean islands to bring claims for reparations against
He was the one, by the way, it's Hermer's delightful little plan to have the show trials about tweets after Southport. That was all his brainchild as well. Let's just throw innocent people in prison for things they've said online. The man is a monster.
Yeah. He's a monster. And just going back to Southport, Starmer went to Southport, turned his back. You might remember this, Alex. Starmer went to Southport after the killings, turned his back to the grieving crowd. Many women in the crowd were in tears, with what had just happened, knowing the girls who had just been killed. Starmer was there for like 45 seconds, did his sort of, camera piece, disappeared. The other day, there were some attacks on a mosque, and he spent hours in the mosque with people, cajoling, consoling, doing everything he could to ingratiate himself with that community. He didn't care about Southport. Hermer doesn't care about Southport. They didn't care. They wanted to throw the people who protested after Southport under a bus. Before they could even judge them, they described them as white, far right, what was the term? They used them as troublemakers. The Home Office came out and said that these people deserve to go to prison before the trials had even been completed. The presumption of innocence before, a trial was thrown into the garbage can. Yep. Southport was a crime against young, white girls, and that doesn't count. But the minute you attack one of their ideological their sort of ideological bugbears, they get absolutely incensed.
In other countries, if there was a top lawyer working on behalf of terrorists, trying to sue the government with faked up allegations, terrorising the armed forces, terrorists who have been essentially employed by a hostile state, do you know what would happen to that person? They would be put in the dock. They would be in high security prison. They wouldn't be made Attorney General.
And
it's the most horrifying thing. And the blimmin' legacy media out there, for 2 years they haven't asked a question. 2 years. They've never pointed out this man was just picked like that by Starmer to become the attorney. For 2 years, they've not even blinked.
And if Hermer were to be held to account in the countries from which some of his defendants come, some of the people he wishes to propose, he'd actually be put up against a wall and shot. And that would be, a relatively nice way for him to go. The man is wretched. He represents absolutely abhorrent forces.
I think he's evil.
He is evil. He's absolutely evil. A lot of these people are evil, Alex. I think the Prime Minister is evil. Ed Miliband is evil. They're doing things which are so damaging to this country. We are being absolutely forced to our knees for no good reason. Culturally, constitutionally, from a security perspective, from an economic perspective, we are being humbled and sacrificed for absolutely no good reason.
I mean, there's a madness in Miliband's zealousy about net zero. There's a total incompetence in terms of Angela Rayner's workers' rights, which is going to cripple businesses. But this stuff is clearly a man who is sadistically motivated by trying to harm this country, because you wouldn't take on those cases. You wouldn't be doing them, essentially, no win, no fee, for 10 years, right?
Do you know what's really interesting to me?
That didn't turn you on.
Do you know what's really interesting to me is if Starmer must be aware that in order to save his job and save his cabinet, as it were, he needs to do 2 or 3 things. He needs to stop the boats, remove the benefits from foreigners, deport illegal migrants. This is all within his power. He could do it. And that would absolutely save his position as Prime Minister, wouldn't it? But he won't do it. They are so absolutely embedded with this ideological obsession with damaging this country. Effectively, that's what it boils down to. That even to save that, they won't even save their own skin. It's so interesting to me that Tony Blair, who I regard as the devil, the sort of grandfather of devilish British politics, even he is saying to Starmer, get a grip of migration, get a grip of this, that and the other, because he can see the political benefit that the Labour Party would get from it. But they're not doing it. They're just not doing it.
You've got to question the motivation. I've said this all along with the Mandelson thing. Why Mandelson? There's something more here. And you know what? If we lived in a non-clown country, all of this stuff about Hermer would have made front page news months and months and months ago, there'd be protests in the street, the man would be harangued, Starmer would be having to be grilled in PMQs. Why did you directly appoint this man, who's done all of these cases, to be the Attorney General? But we live in a clown world, unfortunately. We live in a country that doesn't know right from wrong, that inverts the truth, that doesn't know a news story when it hits them between the eyes. Honestly, I don't even know why we bother anymore. Ben, don't go anywhere. I need a breather, because that's just, honestly, it's making my blood boil. I'm in despair. So I'm going to have a cup of tea. Then when we come back, let's talk about who we want to deport and put Herma top of the list. That's after this.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just reading some of your messages here. I think my favourite of the day, it just says, stop before I go and hire a hitman. That's kind of how I'm feeling right now, if I'm honest with you. I've got to leave this one alone, because I've actually been poking around into the past of Herma for a long time. Like I said, if you go onto my Substack, that's alexwoman.com. What else would it be called? I've done a number of pieces on the legal cartel, and I've been very careful about what I've said about this publicly, because you don't want to libel lawyers, especially those as nasty as Herma. But now the Telegraph's got it all out there in writing, I feel a little bit more emboldened to say how I feel. Anyway, let's park it before I blow a artery or something, because I can't even... If I was the next government, I would say I want these people in... I would actually want them in a court of law, in the dock, facing trial. I would. That's not because I'm a psychopath, because, look, I'm sorry, can we trust that you haven't been working for hostile states while you were appointed to our government? Because everything in your past record as a barrister suggests that you have connections with the IRGC. Oh, the same IRGC that wasn't prescribed in the United Kingdom, although the rest of Europe's done this. Who would have made that decision? Oh, that's right, the Attorney General. some pretty big questions we need to answer. Well, they need to answer. Let's move on, because like I said, I'm going to blow a gasket if I don't. I'll be joining you hiring that hitman. I'll be using my little pens in my hair like poison darts. Let's welcome back Ben Habib. Hello, Ben. Have you poured yourself a nice strong whiskey or something to calm yourself down after those revelations?
I haven't. I thought maybe I'd already had too much to drink, because I thought they were pens in your hair.
All I can say
I was trying to figure out what you've done.
You've got a
but
really,
I'm glad you've removed them.
You've got a really handsome-looking alcohol tray behind you. What you got over your shoulder there? I saw something quite nice looking, like, you know.
I've got a nice bottle of Remy Martin, which I...
Is it?
Which I indulge in from time to time.
I haven't even got my glasses on, but my little carafe radar started bleeping remotely. Let's talk about Reform UK policy here, because there's, you were a Brexit Party MEP with me at one point. You were all part of the Reform gang. They've come out with their asylum policy. They want to do an immediate review of all asylum claims retrospectively from the last 5 years. They say this would target around 400,000 people who would then be liable for deportation under the plans, which would target anybody granted asylum or overstaying a visa or from a country deemed safe by Reform-led government. That is on top of 600,000 deportations over the next 5 years. They've got into a lot more detail, saying that they are going to create detention capacity, modular detention capacity, for 22,500 people, which would allow that many to be deported each month, 250,000 a year. But they've also talked about how they would need to do this in terms of legally scrapping things like the ECHR. I mean, what do you make of it? It sounds like they are sitting there, doing the research, counting the numbers, coming up with strategies far more radical than any other government's done so far.
Well, I'm very glad you used the word radical, because it is radical. It's not extreme. People would like to paint the picture that asking people to go home after they've been in this country, been our guests and been given security when they fear their own country, somehow asking them to go home is extreme. It's not extreme. What is extreme is opening our borders, letting in illegal migrants to this country, giving them the kind of benefits we do, and then settling them in this country as if they have a right to be here. So I'm delighted to see this policy from Reform UK. Actually, if you don't mind me saying so, Alex, it looks remarkably similar to a policy that Advance UK released on the 7th of February earlier this year, in which we declared that we would reverse all asylum grants and all indefinite leave to remain that has been granted since 2019, effectively to reverse the Boris wave and to make sure that our borders, to the extent that they've been breached since 2019, since Boris Johnson came to office, would be absolutely protected.
Let's talk about reversing all indefinite leave to remain for the past 5 years. When you say that, all indefinite leave to remain, I mean, there'll be a lot of people there who are Canadians who have come over here and lived in the country for however long and decided they want to settle in Britain now because they might have had a kid here or something like that. Are we reversing their indefinite leave to remain? Is this
so we have a carve out for spouses. So if they're married to a British citizen and they're here, that's different. There is a carve out for that. But all indefinite leave to remain for people who've come here and achieved that indefinite leave to remain since 2019 will be reversed back to 2019. And there may be the odd case, which is a hardship case, and everyone cites that case as this being a policy that's a bit harsh. But the reality is that we have to secure this country. And we've had over 5 million people come to this country since 2019. And we've got to reverse this idea that indefinite leave to remain is almost a right for those who've come here, has to be debunked. It is a gift by this nation to those who come here to have the right to stay here indefinitely. Asking them, having been here, to go home is not extreme.
Okay, but do you not think they're sort of changing the rules retrospectively? I'm going to play devil's advocate because I know, and you actually know, people who'd be affected by this if it were to become a policy. So do you remember my lovely neighbours when I used to live in London? because I know you met them at one point when I had a house party.
I think they were Turkish, weren't they?
Exactly. My wonderful neighbours, an oncologist, a biochemist. Their son, who's been schooled in the United Kingdom now for the past 7 years, is about to do his A-levels. I adore them. Now, because they've had changes in their visa statuses, because of COVID in the middle of all of it, went from being employed to self-employed, it sort of knocks the clock back every time when it comes to indefinite leave to remain. And they are terrified about the idea that it's even going to be moved to 10 years' time, because they're like, our son has only ever known the British education system. We love it. I've seen them in floods of tears over this. Really stressed. And you're basically saying that we should deport them.
Well, as awful as that story sounds, it's not Advance UK's policy that should be blamed, or Reform's policy if Reform goes down this track as well. It's the governments that have abused our immigration system that should be blamed. Because if immigration had taken place in modest numbers, and modest immigration is good for any civilization because it keeps you in tune with the rest of the way, the rest of the way the rest of the world is evolving. Modest immigration is a good thing. But we have had mass immigration, both legal and illegal, and we are now at a point of crisis. This is a state of emergency for this country. And in writing the balance, there will be cases like your friends from Turkey who might feel aggrieved. But at the end of the day, what we're asking them to do is not extreme. We're just saying, I hope you've enjoyed your time here. Now, we've got real issues in the United Kingdom. We ask you, please go home to your country and let us settle ourselves. And when we've settled ourselves, when we've got a government that actually understands what's what, and we don't have people like Hermer in office, we will then become a more welcoming, generous country the way we used to be.
I have sympathy with blaming successive governments. I do. But I often think that some of the worst people in this country, some of the absolute worst, who go around shouting anti-Semitic things, wanting to trash this nation, are white middle-class people. I'm sorry, but it isn't.
From 600 AD.
It's not my former neighbours who we spent the whole of the period after the Queen's death together. They're more British than most of these pro-Palestine lunatics.
You're 100% right, Alex. But the sad thing is, because our system's been so abused, we're now going to have to use some blunt instruments to settle the country. And there will be cases where we'll think, well, they were great people, but they just didn't sit on the right side of the rules. And this won't be the fault of Reform, if Reform enacts these policies. But then, it's the fault of former governments not having a handle on it.
People not sitting the right side of the rules, but that's where I agree with the idea that anyone who's sort of, come into the country illegally, great, you face whatever you face as far as I'm concerned. But people have come legally with visas, contributing their tax, raising their children here, who thought they were living by one set of circumstances, who have integrated and contributed, to then retrospectively be targeted. I must admit, I'm slightly uncomfortable with it.
Indefinite leave to remain is not giving them British citizenship. It is just saying you are welcome to remain indefinitely. And the British government is well within its rights to say, well, that indefinite period has now come to an end. That is not extreme. That's not breaking a contract. I completely agree with you. Where we've granted British citizenship, that's a different. That takes things to a different level, because at that point you have welcomed them into the bosom, if you like, of the country, and to strip them then of their British citizenship is potentially an extreme decision to make, and that. Even that may need some review,
but this
such
is
as, for example, the Egyptian.
So many of the wrong-uns in this country are third or fourth generation, immigrants, or like I said, white middle-class people.
I mean, Starmer and Hermer, they go back to 600 AD.
Yeah,
and I'd have them on trial. I would have them on trial.
It's a very difficult thing, and we have to somehow balance doing pretty radical things with also trying to be as sensible as possible. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. It's been so good venting about that nasty Hermer. But go pour yourself one of those brandies, and I'll be jealous. I'll pretend I've got one. Right, okay, the brilliant Ben Habib there. Shall we move on to topics new after the break? Because I am going to be quizzing a young man called Sean Hickey, who's head of content at Politics Joe, about why he wouldn't want to fight for Britain. It could end up getting pretty interesting, so do stay tuned.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello. Now, have you ever wondered what goes through the minds of young people when they say, I wouldn't fight for this country? Well, apparently 50% of them feel that. I can't say that I feel that. I'm sort of going the opposite direction and going through the process of signing up as a reservist. But it'd be interesting to find out quite why they're so down on Britain, or so down on the idea of when it comes to the 11th hour, cometh the day, cometh the heroes, that apparently they wouldn't pick up arms. Let's see if we can understand. Let's speak now to Sean Hickey, Head of Content at Politics Joe, who is... what would you call you? A pacifist? Or why is it that you would say, no, absolutely wouldn't fight for Britain?
Well, thanks for having me on, Alex. I don't think that young people in Britain feel particularly served by the country that they live in. You know, I hope you don't mind me saying generations like yours in comparison to generations like mine have had a lot better deal when it comes to the welfare state.
I wouldn't
well, I mean,
hold on.
I've not even made my case yet. I've not even made my case yet. I mean, you're looking at a social housing system that was decimated in the 1980s. The stock hasn't been rebuilt in any way, shape, or form. That's a topic that young people in Britain, we go up and down the country, speak to people of all shapes and sizes and ages. And the one thing that young people say to us is that I can't, nor will I ever be able to afford a house in this country. Along with other things, the difficulty in finding a job. And if you do find a job, whether that's going to pay you well enough. I think all of these things mix up into a soup of reasons why people in the UK wouldn't fight, or young people certainly wouldn't fight for the country that they live in.
Now, I agree with all that. I just want to sort of let you understand that I was working since the age of 14. Newspaper rounds, supermarkets, daytime doing admin input, night times in a nightclub, and I finally got on the housing ladder 6 months ago at the grand old age of 41. So
Congratulations.
I don't consider myself part of some sort of lucky generation that got given anything. The only thing that I did actually benefit from was I didn't have to pay the ridiculous tuition fees that young people who want to go to university have to pay today. But otherwise, kind of, you know, you can bracket me in with your lot. But the thing is, though, it's a sort of different thing. Saying, well, I can't buy a house or I can't get a job, is slightly different from, you know, if all of a sudden Russia decided to send amphibious vehicles along the eastern coast and storm our towns and cities, or let's say sleeper cells dotted around the country rose up and started to, you know, chuck fire bombs in places, in towns and cities all around the UK, going, nah, let it happen. I mean, surely, when it comes to that moment, when it's defending your family, defending your neighbours, defending, you know, it might not be your property, but property of relatives, defending the fact that we have freedoms in this country, or be they seemingly quite scant, that, you know, you would want to do that, surely.
No, look, I mean, the survey that we're talking about is whether you would fight for Britain, right? And that question in itself it leaves open these many scenarios. I think the last time Britain was involved in a war was Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Over 600 British personnel fought for Britain in those wars. Died for what? You know, we don't have to get into the rights and wrongs of the deployment to Iraq in the first place. But I mean, surely if your lot was being attacked by Russia, I think there would be a very different answer to the survey. But particularly when it comes to being deployed, I mean, you look at the way that Donald Trump is acting in Iran at the moment. I think if you ask people in the streets, be they young or old, I don't think they'd be too keen on Keir Starmer sending them to fight in Tehran on behalf of Donald Trump, you know. So it's a very different question, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's difficult, though, because that's it. When it says, would you fight for Britain, it doesn't say, would you join the armed forces, OK? Because that is a different question, which to me would suppose, would you join the armed forces means deployment overseas to whatever particular mission or exercise the government have decided that they want our troops to undertake. Fighting for your country, to me, sort of suggests something different. It means defence of the realm. It reminds me of my great-grandfather, who is in Philosophe Cemetery in France, because just before he was about to come home to the United Kingdom to meet his new baby, he got hit by shrapnel. And he was younger than I am right now. Both my grandparents fought in the Second World War. Both of them from extremely poor families. They lived in a rental accommodation all of their lives until the day, in a council house, sorry, until the day they died. They never got on the housing ladder. When you look at all the fishermen of D-Day who went over in their small vessels to help rescue our troops, what I find strange about this is throughout history, a lot of the people who have stood up and been counted and said, I will go and defend this country, have actually been the poorest in society by and large. They seem very often the ones, exactly the people you might be describing, who can't get on a housing ladder and haven't got a satisfying job, seem to be in history the ones who have said, I will go to the front line.
I think what you mentioned there as well, the thing of the distant relative of yours, what was it you said, your grandparents?
My grandparents
lived
both fought in the Second World War. Yeah, they both fought in the Second World War.
Lived in a council house. I think that's the key to the issue, is that there was a social contract that existed at that time that doesn't seem to exist for young people today. You know, if I was to pick up arms for Britain and fight in the Somme tomorrow, I'd be fighting from a HMO. I would not have the kind of the thought of, well, am I going to be fighting on behalf of my little plot of land or the plot of land that's owned by the government that I pay my dues into day in, day out and get something out of? It's not just young people, it's old people, it's people of all ages that are just not represented by the country that they live in. I mean, you look at the stats in other countries of the level of, and I think there's also a thing of whether it's patriotism or whether it's fighting, because I think British people are in general quite patriotic people. However, the countries where people would say, yeah, do you know what, I would if Russia came knocking at the door or China came knocking at the door tomorrow, I'd pick up arms and fight, are the Nordics. And those countries have very strong welfare states, very strong from cradle to grave systems in place that would keep people in house, in job, with a very reliable retirement package. All of these things exist for people in countries like Finland, Norway, Denmark, the Baltic states as well you look at. But also there's concepts like conscription in those countries that never seem to be
right.
Kind of an eye roll, but
I mean, what's interesting about that, we actually have an extremely generous welfare state in the UK, by and large. I think we've got a lot of I think many of the issues you're flagging up are extremely relevant and I think extremely true, can I just say, about young people feeling like they're not prioritised. That, you know, it's hard to have ambition or have a sense of belonging. But when I think the thing that's sort of the predication for places like Scandinavia and the Baltic states is they know what it's like to live near threat. And a lot of them actually have built in national service. You know, one of my really good friends is Finnish, and they all have to go do national service for a year. That is a sort of typical pattern.
I'll tell you what, at one time, many moons ago, I lived in Helsinki for a while, and I spoke to a lot of people. Yeah, wonderful place. I'd recommend anybody to go.
Great.
What I found when I was there was a lot of people had served in the Finnish armed forces as part of their conscription. There's also like social service and this kind of thing as well that they have. But apart from a little bit of a grumble, which people from the Nordics do tend to do for most things, never mind when it comes to the conscription side, I think a lot of people there did find that they had kind of a renewed sense of civic duty from doing these kinds of things. Now, if that would work in Britain, I don't think it's necessarily a thing that you could just take in the Britain that exists now. Because again, you mentioned this welfare state that we're talking about, but there isn't great welfare for people who have children. There isn't great welfare for people who are in job. Well, people are being topped up by universal benefits because their wages are so low in this country. So there, again, to the social contract, there's a break in this social contract in this country where a lot of that needs to change before you get to a point where people would say, do you know what, I will pick up arms for this country and fight.
And a lot of interesting things that we could continue talking about, but sadly, Sean, we've run out of time. It's been really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for giving up your evening to have this discussion. I really appreciate it. OK, right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're joined by a great friend of mine, Noaya Khan. She is going to be talking about the Muslim-only rental flats. That's after this.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, let's squeeze in a couple of messages, shall I? Martin Aberdeenshire says, can I suggest all these lefty pearl-clutching anti-British Brits have their passports cancelled so they can't travel? That will make them think twice. I was just making the point earlier that if you're going to stop putting, blanket things in place for people who have come, contributed, integrated, all the rest of it, and regard everybody as a problem, like I said, there are plenty of people in Britain who are born here, like Lord Irma, who I think is far more problematic. I wasn't by any means. Someone messaged me something I didn't understand about Elizabethan times and the worthy poor. I'm like, what? So I talking about Catholicism. I'm like, what? I wasn't saying we want to deport British people from their own country. I was making the point that when you start penalising other people who've integrated, contributed, brought up their kids here and just gone, right, off you go, back to your own country, there's a long list of people you can't send away that I think would be more worthy. I'm not saying we do it, for crying out loud. I'm not saying, yeah, let's, go down the pro-Palestine march and drag all the St. Johns and Camillas and shove them on some sort of Hercules and airdrop them over a remote island. Not a bad idea, though, is it? Anyway, joking. Right. I work in the job centre, going all St Georged up tomorrow. Can't wait for a comment that someone may find it offensive. I'll simply say, they won't be wanting our hard-earned tax money then, will they? Do you know what? I've got to try and sort of get St Georgified tomorrow. Of course, you know, St George's Day bingo is you'll go on social media and the first post you'll see will be reminding you that St George is actually Turkish, because we're not allowed to have anything English anymore, are we? We've always got to be reminded, ha ha, your patron saint was actually born in Turkey. Give it a rest. Can we just not celebrate England, please? And this is a brilliant one from Wendy. The reason why no one would fight for their country is because it's not their country. We don't belong to a cohesive community anymore. You fight for your kin, your brethren, those that share your values. You don't lay down your life on the line for cultural strangers, different faiths, a different language. It's like asking me to go and fight for Nigeria. The answer's no. Although arguably, during World War II, plenty of people from different cultures and different faiths did actually come and fight for Western European countries. And there are plenty of people who still do that. I'm thinking of the Gurkhas. But I think you make an extremely valid point there, which segues me back to this story about Muslim landlords. And this isn't people who are, you know, wanting to rent out a spare room in their family home. These are people who've bought properties in order to then prosper from being a landlord, have been advertising that they want specific tenants, Muslim only, for example. Let's speak to Nuaya Khan, journalist and host of Beyond Belief. Now, I think that when it comes to particularly the Muslim community, I find them to be extremely introverted in many respects. I'm saying that I actually lived with a Muslim guy when I was at university. He was one of my housemates. But out of all of the communities that come to Britain, I find them to be, in many respects, the most balkanised. So this story doesn't surprise me.
No, Alex, you're right. There's very much a high in-group preference when it comes to Muslims, you know, and you can, I mean, not only is this illegal to discriminate on religious grounds or lack thereof, but, you know, can you imagine if the tables were turned, first of all, Alex, it would be an absolute travesty. But even if, you know, they argue for practical reasons because, you know, being a Muslim is effectively an entire way of life and, you know, it's very much separate and segregated from the English way of life, for example. So having, you know, sharing a house space where you don't want any non-halal meat, you don't want pork used and cut with the same knives and on your counter, you don't want any little dogs running around, you don't want people of the opposite gender free mixing, you don't want any alcohol brought in, you don't want, you know, your roommates turning up in, you know, scantily clad clothing and going clubbing and turning up at all hours of the night. These are probably the arguments you'd hear from why they have this in-group preference and they'd rather it just be a house full of Muslims. I think another separate issue would be Muslim landlords wanting to just kind of keep the money within the Muslim economy and give them a better deal. So there's that. But yes, you've got the birds of a feather flock together kind of argument. But again, with Islam, there's always some nefarious kind of stereotypical prejudices come out as well because of their puristic ritual cleansing before prayers and things like that. They do also sometimes view non-Muslims as, you know, not being as hygienically on the same level as them. And there's all of these little things that play. Couple that in with the pork aspect and you've got a whole myriad of stereotypical racist elements to it.
Is there anything, because the way I'm reading this, it's not so much about there's a spare room in this house with other Muslims, therefore we want it to be a Muslim. It's more just pure business. I've bought a house specifically for the purpose of then becoming a landlord to make money, and I only want to have Muslim tenants. And what I want to ask you, I suppose, as a former Muslim, is there an element, because I feel like I've picked this up from Islamists around the place, that there's this idea that the Ummah is superior to everybody else, that you look after the Ummah first, that actually all these people who are not Muslims, well, they should work for us. They're below us. They should pay a jizya, a tax, or they shouldn't have these benefits. We deserve all the great stuff. We're going to give it all to us because we're the Muslims, and all those other, you know, people who aren't Muslims, the kafir, whatever they're called, they can just go and, you know, jog on. Is there an element of that going on, do you think?
I think so, especially when you're in you said it well, but in a foreign country, which is a non-Muslim land, you look out for yours first and foremost, which, as you mentioned, is the Ummah. So if you look at a lot of within the halal economy or Muslim economy, the advertising is very much For my non-Muslim brothers and sisters, the mosques offer help to to my Muslim brothers and sisters. The mosques offer help to my Muslim brothers and sisters. There's always this kind of, feeling of an extended family wherever a Muslim can help another Muslim. But also, Alex, I think it's also symptomatic of a larger problem, which we see all around us. Because even in this advert, for example, the areas mentioned within London, anyway, that I could speak to, are already such heavily populated Muslim areas, so you'd be forgiven for thinking, it was Bangladesh or Islamabad in some of those parts. But I just want to let you picture one scenario of how this plays out. For example, if you're a Muslim student coming to this country and you want to rent one of those places, and so you're already living with other fellow Muslims, you don't have any pork in the house, you don't go clubbing, you don't integrate with the larger British wider community, and then let's say you get married as well, you get married at the local mosque, that marriage ends in a breakup. You go to buy and force services to support you because you don't really understand English to the extent that you should by now. And those jobs are then advertised for, positively discriminated for Muslim women to help other Muslim women. So you've got that little economy gearing up. You've only ever shopped in halal places. And so there's an enclave that you're already living in. You've made friends with other people in the Islamic community. Now you're working with women whose jobs are created just to help you, which is, again, English people missing out on jobs across various sectors. And so you've got this perfect enclave in the perfect parallel society that we see in Newham, Dagenham, Barking, all these areas where these houses are advertised. So it's just kind of like embellishing an already existing problem and keeping it, and turning it more and more enclavey, if you will.
It's a state within a state, because in a lot of these places as well, most of the local council are from those communities and not remotely diverse in their representation. I do worry about this. I think that we're fast becoming a sort of constellation of little enclaves in this country, and it ain't going to work out well. I can guarantee you that much. Noraya, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a real pleasure having your company. Right, if you want to send messages about anything we've been talking about, 0344 499 1000 is the number if you'd like to give me a call. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message. You can also leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number on text. If you're going to send a text, write the word talk before you text. Everything's your normal network rate. Now, Claire in Buckley, North Wales, who's an avid fan of Weird Hour, has messaged saying, Alex, I've been brave tonight and sent you a voice note. Let's dig that one out, team. We want to hear what Claire's voice is like for the first time ever. It's not going to be Paul Cox after the break. We're going one better. Sorry, Paul. We got Leo Kearse instead. So buckle up. It's going to get interesting just after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
There we go. Let's chill out. It's the final hour of the show. Oh, so it's time to try and, I don't know, have a bit of fun maybe? That is why what we like to do is make sure we get somebody with a little bit of comic ability, some wit as well as wisdom to accompany us for the final hour. And we've got one of my absolute faves for you just now. He barely needs introduction. Paul Cox has deserted us. He's gone over to Brussels to, I don't know, get mugged by migrants. So we've decided to go one better. We've got the fantastic, the handsome, the erudite and the always entertaining Mr. Leo Kearse. Hi, Leo.
Hi, Alex. What an intro.
Oh, well, you are. You're basically one of the greatest men on this here planet Earth. Unlike, can I just say, Lord Hermer. I really hate that man. Can you just do a big, massive anti-Hermer rant for me, please?
Yeah, he's a complete toad. He's such a member of the blob that, you know, Keir Starmer is at the centre of. He's like every action he takes, everything that he hides behind all the legislation, every international law. But he's so keen on enforcing international law, he doesn't seem to be keen on doing anything for Britain, for the country he's supposed to represent. When he's at the centre of the Chagos Islands handover, which, thank God, thanks to Trump, looks like it's not actually going to go ahead. But it was just a classic example. It's another one of these things like reparations for other countries, where we would pay billions. It's like, we're not even just giving the Chagos Islands away. They're nice islands, you know. I'd like to have them. We're not even giving them away. We're paying Mauritius to take them off our hands. Like the Chagos Islands are a king size mattress left in the street in Walthamstow. It's it's ridiculous. Like, this guy's just working against Britain's interests and working for this international law that doesn't seem to do us any favours at all. And we're the only people who stick to it.
It's mad that we've just become so normalised to this stuff? Because I was kind of thinking, if it was any other country, right? And I've worked in various countries around the world, but the Attorney General, it transpires that, you know, before they were just appointed to Attorney General, never elected, that they had spent their entire legal careers trying to get compensation from the British taxpayers for terrorists connected to the IRGC in Iran. Normally, in a sensible country, you'd be like, ooh, that's a bit funny. Let's put him in the dock. Here, it's like, yay, let's make him Attorney General. It's almost like this stuff has become so normal that in any other country, something that to me would amount to treason is like, no, it's rewarded. Why don't you run everything instead?
And if you look at the blobocracy, if you look at not just Hermer, but also Starmer, also Sadiq Khan, all these guys, the entire blob seems to be human rights lawyers. And when I was growing up, I thought human rights lawyers were, I thought it was some sort of noble profession, standing up for the rights of, oppressed people. But it's not at all. It's always representing some despicable terrorist and trying to juice some money out of the British taxpayer to give to the worst people in the world.
Could you imagine if this guy had sort of been successful? We'd have been having to pay millions and millions of pounds to people who are like in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and terrorist organisations while, I don't know, demonising our soldiers and then preventing them from being able to be effective, making them really unsafe when they go abroad because they're like, oh, I don't know if I should fire a weapon, could end up on a murder trial. It's pure wickedness. And you have to wonder, what motivates these people? Because Hermer did that as a no-win, no-fee. It's not like someone said, oh, do you fancy doing this? Or it just landed in his in-tray. He's like, oh, I really want to do that. Let's get stuck in. And even when he was told, a lot of these allegations don't stack up. A lot of these people aren't who they say they are. He just carries on going anyway. It's perverse.
And they always use the excuse of law being a cab rank. So, you don't choose your clients, you just take the next case that comes along. But if that's the case, how come some of them, every single case they had was Al-Qaeda, was the Taliban, was ISIS, was, some hate preacher who, is trying to get millions of dollars of compensation for being quite rightly thrown in Guantanamo Bay. Number one, it's a complete fallacy that there's a cab rank that you can to quite a strong extent. You can pick and choose the cases that you take. And for them to all have, just somehow by chance managed to only take cases that go against the British state, and to then be in positions of huge influence and power within the British state. I mean, that's terrifying. That's an example of the sort of the long march through the institutions. We've been taken over by communists who hate us.
It's crazy. I always say we spent half of the last century fighting communism, the beginning of this century fighting terrorism. Now it's sitting on our green benches. Now it's blimmin' running the country. But what I find so staggering about all of this, that there's been a load of noise around Mandelson. Rightly so. He should never have been American ambassador. It was the most wild, dim-witted, dangerous decision that I've ever seen made in terms of an ambassadorial appointment. But to me, that's nothing in comparison to Hermer. And remember, of course, so this is the guy, these people who he was representing for almost 10 years, trying to lead a witch hunt against our armed forces on behalf of terrorists, connected to the IRGC. Funny, isn't it, that despite people related to the IRGC going around the place setting fire to synagogues and planning terror attacks, we're one of the only countries that doesn't prescribe the IRGC. The EU turned around and went, right, we're going to prescribe the IRGC. We're alone in this. We're like outliers when it comes to this. Funny that, because who would make that decision? Possibly the Attorney General. I mean, this, when it talks about, Mandelson, is this an issue of trust from the public, national security? I'm like, don't you look over here. That one's now dealt with. This is far bigger. This is Starmer's chum who was doing all this. And now he's just directly appointed. Has that man faced vetting? Well, given the client list he's got, I don't think he'd stand a cat in hell's chance of passing any sort of security vetting.
Well, the state of Keir Starmer's appointees, I think that if somebody passed vetting, they'd have less of a chance of actually getting put in the post. It's it's ridiculous.
But no, this is it. You kind of get to the stage. Who's Starmer going to appoint next? Is he going to, I don't know, bring back Shamima Begum to be Minister for Women and Equalities? It's just, it beggars belief that there is so much crazy stuff that Starmer does that we all get distracted by all this other stuff. And it's like, but have you not seen the steaming great dump in the corner of the room over there that we call our Attorney General? It's madness.
Starmer's really sort of beholden to legislation. He thinks everything is legislation, everything is words, everything is process. So if he can reverse engineer a process onto something that went wrong, then he can prove that he's fine. He reminds me of that show Chernobyl, about the Chernobyl disaster.
Oh, yeah.
And the two party apparatchiks are standing, like, working out who's responsible and, what step of the process went wrong. When the Chernobyl's going up in flames behind them, it's churning. They're not looking at actually fixing the problem. They're concerned about allocating blame. And that's what Starmer feels like to me. And because he's a lawyer, because he thinks everything is legislation, he doesn't understand that sometimes the law is wrong. In certain situations, the law can be not fit for purpose, and sometimes the law needs to be tweaked. And I think the cases of these SAS men who are now being, retrospectively charged with or accused of committing war crimes, for want of a better word, I think that's disgusting, because we know that in war, things can get messy, things can get blurred, but these are young guys, 19, 20, 21 years old, in incredibly dangerous situations, fighting to preserve our safety and security. And, sometimes, the laws that might be worked out in a nice, clean, warm office in Brussels by, some sort of vegan communist, they're not going to apply out in the battlefield when you're facing down, legions of Taliban who literally want to crack your skull open and eat your brains. So, I think maybe sometimes we could show a bit of leeway, a bit of leniency when it's people who are risking their lives to protect us, particularly when, as we can see with the rise of Islamism in the UK, we're going to need those guys pretty soon.
Well, this is exactly my point. The Hermer thing has terrified me for 2 years now. It has terrified me because I think there's this great stinking scandal right at the heart of his government. And as for Starmer, I mean, the guy did gap year over in a communist Soviet camp, for crying out loud. Who does that as part of their gap year? That's like me going after university. I'm going to go join ISIS for a period, then coming back and becoming the Prime Minister, for crying out loud.
Well, it's pretty popular in some communities in Britain. You know more. There were more British Muslims fighting for ISIS than there were fighting in the British military and the British armed forces. Isn't that a crazy fact?
Oh, and it's all right that, when push comes to shove, they'll have a good old barrister in Herman when they get back. You can't wait to try and take on their cases and sue the British government for, I don't know, calling them terrorists or some sort of made-up controversy. It's just, it's actually terrifying. It is terrifying because I genuinely think we've got like an enemy running the country, basically, because I think Herman calls all the shots over Starmer. I'm like, can someone deal with this man, please? I don't mean in a sort of scary way. I'm not, advocating for the hitman approach that was mentioned earlier. Let's talk now about, we're talking about dealing with people. You're not allowed to do that anymore. You're not allowed to, if some, great old thief is looting your shop, you're not allowed to stop them. This is the latest scandal. First, was it a guy in Waitrose who tackled someone with a massive bag full of Lindt Easter bunnies and got angry after the guy made off and then sort of, in frustration threw an Easter egg or whatever it was at a shopping trolley and then got fired. Now we learn of Sean Egan, who had been the manager of a Morrison's, working at that store for 29 years, had seen the same guy coming in, day out, shoplifting. Now, the profits and loss of his supermarket as the manager are on his shoulders. The buck or the pound, if you will, the shopping trolley pound, stops with him. And so when he finally tackles this shoplifter, he then gets fired. Make that make sense.
Yeah, it's terrible. So a lot of these supermarkets have policies where they say deter but don't confront. So don't actually physically confront any shoplifters, just let them walk out with the stuff.
How are you supposed to deter them if you're not confronting them? How does that work?
Exactly, and the police won't turn up. The police won't turn up because they've got better things, bigger things to deal with than somebody stealing a bunch of Easter eggs. And by the way, somebody stealing Easter eggs, because I know people on the left always say, "Oh, but they're stealing to feed their children. They're stealing to feed." It's like, what? You're gonna feed your kids Lindt Easter eggs? It's like, at least if they are to feed your kids, at least nick some of the Cadbury ones, not the top shelf, most expensive ones in the shop. They're obviously nicking the Easter eggs to sell so they can buy drugs. Which that's 99% of shoplifting is to sell something in the pub to get drugs. But so these supermarkets have this policy of non-confrontation. But that's fair enough when it's somebody just stealing stuff. But with this particular incident. With this particular incident, the guy came into the shop and was spitting on people. He spat on the manager who was sacked. So if somebody's coming in and actually presenting a physical threat, who's actually looking like he's going to spit on customers and create, a public health hazard, that's assault. If you spit on somebody, that's assault. So in that case, the manager is absolutely doing his job in tackling this person who's presenting a physical threat to other staff and other customers. And the guy should be given a medal. He shouldn't be. And it should be a proper one, not a Lindt chocolate medal, a proper medal, because he's doing what is actually required of all of us in that situation. He's protecting people from harm. Yeah. This isn't about theft anymore if somebody's spitting.
I'm still trying to figure out how you deter without confrontation. Like, what's he supposed to do? Be like the Wizard of Oz behind his curtain and sort of bing bong. This is your supermarket manager here. We can see you about to nick that bottle of Jack Daniels. I would rather deter you. I'm not going to confront you. I mean, what? How do you deter someone without confronting them? I don't even see how that's possible.
I've seen things like they've put cardboard cutouts of police officers, and so I mean that might deter a criminal if they're really, really, really short-sighted and they think it's an actual real police officer. I've also seen little signs next to the eggs saying, "Oh, please don't swap the eggs around in the box because that's shoplifting." So people take the nice eggs, your Burford Browns, and swap them with the battery, the cage eggs, and walk out with pay less money for fancy eggs. But yeah, like you say, deterrence like that, it only works on people who obey deterrence. The whole point about being a criminal is you don't follow the rules, you don't follow the guidance. You know what I mean? It's like being Peter Mandelson going for vetting. The rules don't apply to you.
But this is the absolute crazy thing now. We live so far away from being a high trust society in some parts of the country now that nothing can be done. I mean, I know when I was sort of spent a lot of my career working in the developing world, you can't trust the police in them parts. But at least the local community have a zero zero-tolerant attitude when it comes to theft. You know, in Ghana, if you go and nick some eggs off a stand, you're probably going to have rocks thrown at you. Everyone's going to, you know, chase you down the street. The problem in this country is that, well, the police aren't going to turn up, security aren't allowed to do anything, the general public aren't allowed to intervene because they'll be the ones who end up in jail. I mean, there's no fallback.
Yeah, maybe this is one of the good things about the rise of Islamism in the UK. Like in a few years' time, we might have Sharia law, and then this Morrison's manager is going to be able to get out a big scimitar like in Indiana Jones and just wallop off this guy's arm when he's stealing the Lint Easter eggs.
What a beautiful vision. Sharia law as chaired by the one and only Lord Hermer, no doubt. Leo, don't go anywhere because I've got some really good stories for you to riff over just after this.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Do you know what's quite interesting? On some level, some of these mad leftists with their short fringes should be absolutely loving what Donald Trump's doing in Iran if they want to just stop oil. Leo, do you know what one of the most under threat industries is when it comes to the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz?
Is it right-wing comedy? It always feels under threat. No, is it? I don't know. Everything seems to be affected, from agriculture to condom making. Everything.
There you go. There it is. Who knew? Well, this is the thing. A lot of the leftists are going, oh, just stop oil, just stop oil. It's like, you do realise that is, you know, being used to preserve condoms. That's being used to make medications. Petrochemicals are used in pretty much everything. And it turns out, apparently, that the world's biggest condom maker is being like, wow, this old Strait of Hormuz is making things a bit difficult for our manufacturing.
Yeah, no, it's affected. I didn't know petrochemicals went into condoms. I thought the whole thing about condoms was you had to keep oil away from them. It doesn't affect me. I make my own from cling film and rubber bands, so absolutely fine. Just some duct tape around the base, and we're good to go. But yeah, the place that makes them is in Malaysia. And they're not able to make enough condoms anymore because they don't have the energy. Because Malaysia, like so much of Southeast Asia, is completely dependent on oil from the Middle East. I think this is a good thing, though. I think this is a good thing. People are going to have to learn the rhythm method again. So we're gonna revive some old traditions. Also, we need more babies in the world. People aren't having enough children, and a big part of the reason for that is, as you can see here, those are some already used condoms, just being displayed on a machine there. That's the machine that I used to put mine on. And you can see we're not going to have enough condoms. So condoms are getting so expensive now that it's actually going to be more cost effective to have a child. So that's good. As far as I can see, that's good. We need more babies in the world. This is going to solve the fertility crisis.
I'm just like slightly staggered at this video footage we've got, and all these sort of strange-looking items that I've never seen stuff like that. Oh.
They're condoms.
Well,
I didn't know when they made them. They do this. They fill them with what is that? I don't want to hazard a guess as to what that fluid was, but it seemed quite realistic.
I don't really know what why are they putting them in like a baking tray? What's that about?
Yeah,
What's that? They're making cupcakes with them.
Yeah, do you ever watch those videos on YouTube of candy factories and things like this? This looks like Mr. Kipling's condoms.
It really does.
I'm half expecting some chocolate sprinkles to come down in these condoms in a moment. I mean, they look like coffee pods. Honestly, if I was slightly senile, I might try and put one of them in my coffee machine.
I think they look like badges. Imagine sort of like being a socialist and going to some sort of parade with all of those like attached to your backpack. Weird. Now, on the subject of condoms, if you were going to be told, right, you're a cadet in the Air Force and you've got to go and do some practice turns out in an aircraft, and then people back home are going to be monitoring your route and all the rest of it, like I do on Flight Tracker, Alex's favourite app at the moment. Don't know why, I've become weird, always was. What would you, if you were in the plane and you're thinking, right, got to go and fly in some sort of formation, what would be the first shape that you would make?
The first shape I would make, I'd probably spell out my tour show itinerary. I'm coming to Barnstaple tomorrow. Thursday night I'll be in Barnstaple. Then on Friday night I'll be in Southampton. So I'd spell out. Tickets are available at leokearse.com. I know that's a lot to spell out using as a cadet using a plane, but that's what I'd go for first. Then if I had some jet fuel left over, which is debatable in these days when there's not enough jet fuel getting through, I would also draw a willy and some testicles.
It's always the go-to, isn't it? You give a man especially some sort of crude instrument, be it a crayon or a Sharpie or a cadet airship or whatever it is, and there you go, the picture's on the screen. They're like, what should we do, guys? Yeah, let's give them a laugh back at home. Oh, I know, let's draw a giant willy. It's always a willy. No one ever goes, I know, let's try and draw ovaries and a vagina. No one does that.
Well, maybe you could, Alex. I believe in you. Maybe you could draw the first aerial ovary and vagina in space.
Aerial uterus.
Those were really good. I hope they fired missiles right when they got to the tip. But I mean, I thought the level of artistry they would grace any of my school books. That's the smoothness of the curves, just beautiful work there.
Yeah, I actually think, obviously they got in trouble for this. They were supposed to be practicing turns, and this was an early morning stunt over Finland. But tracking data revealed at least 4 planes that took off from, no one can say that because it's Finnish, drew massive members in the skies. 4 of them. Prankster pilots also drew 2 hearts in the sky near. No one can say that because that's written in Finnish. I bet those are the girl cadets, isn't it? Boys, I'm going to draw a willy. And girls, shall we do a lovely heart? That is so gender-based, isn't it? But here you go. Incredulous viewers tracked the naughty doodles on live flight website Flight radar! I look at that thing all the time, and I'm yet to see a giant penis. I'm really disappointed.
Yeah, I don't think they're allowed to do it when they're coming into Heathrow on an A380. You're not going to see them form that holding pattern. It's interesting that it's called a holding pattern because that's what some people like to do with their. That's another story. What's also interesting this week is a couple of, I think it was in South Korea, a couple of pilots got fined and got in a lot of trouble because they crashed their planes while they were trying to take selfies or trying to take photographs from the plane. So not anything penis related. They weren't taking dick pics or anything. They weren't. They were literally just filming outside their plane. But there was some leniency. The judge gave them some leniency because the Air Force hadn't laid down strict rules around filming from the planes, and apparently a lot of people were doing it. And now it's been ruined for everybody by these guys who crashed into each other.
Now, because I've got a few extra minutes with you, I saw a story today, and I don't know why this has just popped into my head. I did send it to my boys, and it hasn't made it onto the news list. And I'm like, do you know what? I'm going to go a bit rogue here. I'm going to do it anyway because I'm in your company. So you remember, one of the best things that Donald Trump said during the campaign to be president, I think it was, when he was talking about people, coming and eating up your pets. Well, it turns out, and they've got video of it on the Sun website, that a Nigerian migrant, this is in Italy, was caught, it's horrible this, Crociata Park in Italy's northeast town of Cesana, April the 15th. He had nicked a cat and was roasting it on some sort of little makeshift brazier at the bottom of a children's slide in a playground.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God! Of all the places to cook a cat, that's terrible. I think the location is worse than the act. In that, and I mean, for God, we know that he's in a children's playground for a certain reason. So it's, I'm just glad he was distracted by this baked cat, so he couldn't actually do any other activities. But that's terrible. I mean, that's genuinely shocking. And also, a cat, how far down? There's so many better things to eat. If you can't grab a sheep or a goat or something like that, I mean, maybe he shouldn't grab one of those because, he'd marinate it too well. A squirrel. You can grab a squirrel,
my goodness.
But a cat.
Well, I know. Well, I'll tell you what, though. When I did live in West Africa, I went to a place called Winneba, which is in Ghana on the coast. And the speciality there, I kid you not, was cat. And this is even more vile, right? The way they liked to kill the cat was to capture it, put it in a bag, and keep smashing the bag until you could hear the cat no more. I'm a massive lover of
terrible.
cats. It's shocking.
Oh, my God.
It's shocking.
That's
and then
terrible.
they had on signs everywhere, cat pepper soup. So I'm sorry, for some people in certain countries, cats are a delicacy. But you can't go nicking pets and roast them in a playground. It's gross.
Yeah, and that's such a sort of a heavy-handed way to kill a cat when all you need is curiosity.
Ah, very good. Do you know who else was actually from Winneba or that neck of the woods? And like I said, cat pepper soup was their speciality. Kofi Annan, he was from there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if he ever had.
Cat. Man's no longer with us to defend himself, but.
Well, I guess he might have done. And who's to say that it's better to eat cows and sheep than eat cats and dogs?
I say so. Cats rule us. They're the greatest creatures on earth.
I just don't think there's enough meat on them.
They don't really. That is true. I can't imagine. I'd never touch a cat, but I'd imagine that they wouldn't really be particularly tender. Leo, thank you so much. It's been so much fun having you here. The brilliant Leo Kearse, ladies and gentlemen. Right, that was our fun. I hope you enjoyed it, because now we're going to get serious again. Because there is a lot going on, once again, over in the Middle East. Are they having a ceasefire? Are they not? Is the Strait of Hormuz open? Is it not? Who's running Iran? Is J.D. Vance on an aeroplane? Is he not? I don't know. Let's see if Errol Moorcoach does, because he's joining us after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back, and welcome to the show, Errol Moore Coach. Great to be catching up with you again. Let's just get straight to the nub of the matter. Where are we? What is going on? Because are there going to be these talks? Are there not going to be the talks? Is JD Vance going? Is he not going? Is there any hope of any resolution? Because, look, I fully supported Donald Trump, and I want to cheer him for what he's achieved so far. But we're now ended up in this sort of grotesque situation where it's almost like reopening the JCPOA.
Yes, I think we have an interesting lull in the fighting, and right now we're trying to see how things shake out. And in that period of time, there's going to be a lot of ideas thrown around and a lot of different parties consulted. Right now, we see President Trump recently just tweeting that he's thankful to somebody, I don't know who he's referring to, but somebody who's agreed to not execute a bunch of female protesters. So I think the fractured nature of who we're dealing with perhaps isn't as dreadful as it looks like, because right now is a restructuring process inside of Iran. But it's fair to question, like, one thing to also be aware of is we have to respect the Iranian posturing positions. They need to be able to show their own people at home that they're in control of things. So the idea that they would go back on things or would stand up JD Vance at a meeting, it does look bad in the short term. It isn't almost completely unexpected. That's why Trump obviously isn't going himself. So I think it is also in a situation where Iran has lost almost all their capacity to project force. And so now we're in a very interesting game of chicken, but it's early on and Trump is obviously willing to extend. So it doesn't look like the worst situation. I don't think we're going to be giving them money, though. Trump won't. I don't think Trump will do that.
But the thing is, I remember Trump 1.0, and he campaigned heavily against the JCPOA. He said, look, there's no point having this because Iran's just not following it. We can't trust them. Rip it up, start again. I also know from a European perspective, European countries loved it because then they could all of a sudden start selling stuff to Iran. Very suspect stuff, can I just say, looking at some of the sort of, lists of itineraries, inventories, rather, of trading items from places like France, Germany, and even the UK. But we've now got into a position where in Iran, we don't really know who is leading it. I hear that they've got a new head of the IRGC who is a bit of a loon, quelle surprise. But we're never going to, if they can sit and have a meeting and say, okay, we'll give up our ballistic missiles. Okay, we won't enrich uranium. They're not even bothering doing that. They're not even saying they'd do those things. But even if they did, we're back to the beginning. If you can't trust them.
You can't trust them, but I suppose Donald Trump decided that we can kill them. And in many times in history, if you destroy somebody's entire navy, their entire air force, their cavalry, all their generals, their Pope King, and everything, and eventually if you don't get what you want and you leave, you can still say it's a victory. And also you have to understand that they've totally lost any trust they might have had as regional bully, though, in that region. The rest of the Arab states have come together. And so while at short, they're saying, oh, this is, downplaying the petrodollar and everything, I think it makes it stronger. So Iran's in a bad situation, and now they're negotiating with even less leverage than before. So if we get back to the same exact negotiating table, but now they have none of their leverage, let's see how that goes.
I mean, do we know now? He said, right, because he's going to call off the ceasefire tonight and start, bombing who knows what and where, probably military sites or weapons manufacturing plants or possibly oil fields, I don't know. But do we know now? He said, okay, you get a bit more time again. How long that lasts?
Well, that's going to, I guess, depend on how far somebody inside of Iran can rise up and be a reliable ally. Trump wants to see promises of ships going through and seeing those ships going through. If he's making a deal with somebody and they can't deliver on the ground, then it doesn't work. If the IRGC takes over in a revolutionary coup in a certain way, takes over the presidency and stuff, I think Trump will resume strikes. And I think Israel is waiting on the wings there because Israel obviously has different objectives than we do, and they would certainly like to continue hitting Iran.
I mean, where do you see this going? Because he wanted this all wrapped up quite quickly. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it'll all be done and dusted. Is it possible to just walk away and say, look, we're going to stop bombing you, but you got nothing left. Get that Strait of Hormuz open. We're going to just leave you to it. Is that, I mean, if push comes to shove, can he do that? What? Because I don't want to join the chorus of the idiots in Europe who kept saying, but what's your plan? What's your plan? What is the end game? Because I frankly think America could turn around to Europe, who begged and pleaded for $60 billion from America to give to Ukraine, and turn around and say, well, what's your plan? This is a long war of attrition now. You're arming them just enough. Ukraine can't beat Russia, so what is your plan? I hate that stupid line of questioning, and yet I find myself itching to ask it. What does happen next?
I think, and this is my strategic opinion, is that the Americans feel that they can play live ball better than the Iranians. And so they're willing to wait and see. The strategic outcomes were pretty obvious. We would destroy everything they have, and their main point of argument would be the Strait of Hormuz, that very tight, narrow causeway. Otherwise, you know, and worst case scenario, we would have actually lost some pilots, or they would have had some captures. So at this point, right now, strategically, I think it's a wait and see. The stock market around the world is responding. Oil is around $80, $90 a barrel. It doesn't seem to be the end-all catastrophic situation in the world. And the longer Iran waits, after 2 weeks, their oil wells back up, and they lose market share as, you know, tankers are going all around the world trying to fill those gaps. So certainly there is impetus for Iran to eventually want to come to the table. Who can hold out longer in a siege? The people who have everything, or the people who have next to nothing? And I think that's where we're going to get to. And economically, it looks like the world is responding to that in a somewhat favorable way.
Yeah, no, very interesting, actually. What is the significance of Donald Trump in terms of these latest negotiations that were supposed to happen in Islamabad? Doesn't seem to be going so well. Why did he say, let's send JD to that, not Witkoff, not Rubio?
Well, I think Rubio sort of was pressing the agenda in other areas, and JD was given a chance to test his mettle on the diplomatic stage. Obviously, he is the technical number two, and certainly perhaps we felt that he was more suited for these negotiations. It seemed like something that also wanted to show the seriousness of the office, Trump sending his second in command, but without going himself. And perhaps it was also a way to equalize who gets what negotiations, as this administration seems to be taking on any and all comers. And I believe Rubio is going to get Cuba. So I think JD. Also, it's maybe not the best thing to get sent to Pakistan either. So maybe not a win for JD Vance there either.
Yeah, I mean, what struck me is actually, you know, I get the impression that Witkoff and Rubio and Kushner are very hawkish, and sort of sending JD to the negotiations. He's a peacenik. He hates interventions. And I wonder if that was it. It's like, well, you know, maybe if we send JD, a deal will get done, because he's not as hawkish, because he actually wants all this stuff over and done with.
That's a fair point. I think the only thing constricting him would be, of course, the terms that Donald Trump would have sent him there with. So I'm not sure how much leeway he had, but as far as maybe an amicable negotiator, somebody who would be more, you know, less hardline, I think JD is our more diplomatic of the group in terms of how he negotiates, and which is why he is the front runner, at least in the odds makers going into the next election.
Very interesting stuff indeed. Eric, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Eric Moorcoach, ladies and gentlemen. Now, do you know what? We've got about 20-ish minutes, 19, 18-ish left to go on the show, and I haven't really spoken to enough of you today. At least I don't feel like I have, and I'd like to. So why don't you get on the blower? By the way, just a little bit of housekeeping as well. I put on my X earlier a big post going, I'm going to be doing the 7 till 10 all week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, then back to my normal shows at the weekend. Not anymore. I'm going to be doing 10 till 1 tomorrow. Julia's not here, so I'm going to be doing 10 till 1 tomorrow, and then I'll do the same, which is normally my show on Friday. It's like musical chairs. I'm like a bar of soap in the shower. You never know when you turn on Talk if I'll be there or if it'll be someone else. But it won't be me in this slot tomorrow. I believe it will be the brilliant Charlie Rowley, who's being sort of, you know, road tested. I wish him all the best luck in the world. But no, I will be up. Well, not that bright and early, but relatively bright and early with the blimmin' tube strike. Don't know how I'm going to get to work. Never mind, we'll figure it out. But I'll be here from 10 till 1 in the morning tomorrow. And then I'll be doing that exact show on Friday, Saturday and Sunday as well. So, yeah, please do tune in. Now, Before that, though, let's get back to the matter in hand, which is give me a call. 03444 99 1000 is the number. It's your normal network rate. I'd love to speak to as many of you as possible before I shuffle off home at 10 o'clock. OK, normal network rate, like I said, don't cost you anything. And do that instead of phoning the takeaway, because the takeaway is going to cost you a lot of money and inches on your hips. Back after this.
The handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Got a little extra bit of semi-breaking news for you there that the wonderful Matt has just pinged me on WhatsApp. Matt's my glorious assistant producer. We love him. We've also got a nickname for him, which I'm probably not allowed to say. But I know, my nicknames probably aren't Ofcom friendly. But we're just going to call him Matt, aren't we? Anyway, he sent me this because the Telegraph have just published, according to their sources, they have eyes and ears inside the Cabinet, apparently. And apparently Cabinet loyalists are now turning against Sir Keir Starmer in droves. This is where things really do start falling apart for a Prime Minister, and you start getting potentially ministerial resignations. Apparently several of his ministers, including Rachel Reeves, Shabana Mahmood, Wes Streeting and David Lammy, has accused the Prime Minister of creating a them and us split between ministers and officials, of course, having gotten rid of various people in the civil service to take the fall for his terrible judgment. The outburst followed attempts by Yvette Cooper and Ed Miliband to distance themselves from the scandal on Tuesday. Angela Rayner, who's been touted as likely leadership challenger, later praising her friend Ed. So it seems to me that things could be moving. It's like the heat being turned up under a frog in a saucepan. At some point, it's going to try and leap out, isn't it? I don't know. He's a funny old carrot, that Starmer, isn't he? But there you go. It does. Let's see if there are ministerial resignations tomorrow. Then things could get interesting. Right, let's do some calls. Let's speak to Ali, who is in Nelson. Hello there.
Yeah, hiya. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I've been listening to your radio show for about half an hour in the car, on and off. And I just wanted to talk about the stigma of, you were talking about Asians generally, that we need to integrate in the society. But being I'm 54 now, I was born here in Burnley, and I think that Asians have integrated enough, and they are still participating and integrating, but there is a stigma regarding Asians and Africans as well in the country, that even though I am 54-year-old and I was born here, we still think in our mind that even though we have the right as everyone else, we have this stigma that still English people, as you want to call them, they still have this in their mind frame that we're against them for some reason. You know, everyone pays taxes. I've been working in one company for 36 years. I've been paying taxes. People around me are in the same, Asians are in the same boat. We do our bit for society, and we integrate, our work. I've got English friends. We have done everything. But at the end of the day, there's still a stigma out there. Now, regarding Facebook and things like Instagram, Facebook, and all there's loads and loads of pathetic things about Islam, and they're going to kill you. The other day at work, someone said to me that we were talking about religion, and he said that, there's one thing I can't understand about your religion. So what's that? It goes, why have you got a God called Allah? And I was trying to explain to him. I said, God, Allah means one God. It just means, it's just the word God, and it's a word God in Arabic.
Right, if an Arab was a Christian was saying the word God, he'd probably use the word Allah, right?
So what it is, in English, God, we don't use God because you can change it to gods. That's the reason why it was an English word that you made afterwards. But in Arabic, it's called Allah because you can't change the word Allah with an S to Allahs.
Right, I see. I get what you mean. Yeah, you can't sort of multiply it to become sort of deities or whatever.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the original point. Yeah, of course.
And then we were talking about, I was explaining to him that our Prophet Jesus, who is very revered in our culture and our religion, our Prophet Jesus, who is the Jesus, we call him Isa. I said in his language, Aramaic, he also said a similar word to God, which was Elo. So there's in Jewish terms, it's a similar word as well. So the word similar, but it's been translated into its own language, Aramaic.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's actually really fascinating. I'm a big reader of the Bible, and you always sort of think you're reading translations. You know, it feels like very old-fashioned English, but you've got to remember it's been translated through Greek and Latin and Aramaic and, onwards. But just on your very first point, which is the one that we're sort of talking about integration, it's great to be able to speak to you, and there are plenty of people who've come to this country who, of course, are integrated. I know many of them. I count many of my friends as people who weren't necessarily born here. But that doesn't negate the situation that there are balkanised blocks. There are people who don't integrate. There are people who don't even speak English. There are people who don't like Western culture and who are living here.
They are the few because what you're trying to project is that this only happens in Muslim society. It doesn't happen in other societies like European societies that have come here or other societies that have come here. Yes, we do get people who struggle. And we have got areas where there's only Asian people who live there. But that's because maybe English people have moved out of the area, and then it's become that obviously like Jewish community. But no one calls the Jewish community in Manchester that why have they got area was just Jewish.
Yeah.
Because slowly over the years, what happens is they need their own shop for kosher food. Like we need a shop for halal food, and then it becomes a bit of a society themselves.
Right, it's naturally a human instinct. Like I was saying, when I lived in China, I lived with all the other English expats because I didn't speak Mandarin, I didn't speak Cantonese. But it's interesting. When I lived in Ghana, when I lived in Kenya, I was totally integrated, mixing with everyone there because we had common language. But also, by and large, not always in Ghana, not always in Kenya, but we also had common faith. And so we could talk about this for hours, but it's been, look, Ali, I'm delighted that you've called us up. And it's always great. I like to have the perspectives of people who say, hey, come on, there is a side to this which we need to discuss. That was Ali and Nelson. Let's speak now to Dan, who is in Liverpool. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Alex. I hope you're having a lovely night. I hope I'm not going to upset you, but I somewhat disagree with your caller, Elliot Duncan, who was on.
Right.
So, for me, it's about sending our young lads and people off to war. And the reason this is important for me is because I lost our cousin, unfortunately, under an IED, and we had to have a closed casket because we couldn't actually find the entirety of his body.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Look, I'm saying this in his memory because I don't want to see any young lad or any young British person go to senseless war. And can someone just guarantee me, even yourself, if we go to war with Russia, is someone else like Starmer in 20 years' time just going to say to us, well done, thank you for fighting for our country, also we're going to come after you now?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Is that going to be the truth?
That the witch hunt, the persecution of armed forces is shocking. And also, you know, the interesting thing about that survey is it sort of was quite... When you drill down into what does it mean, would you fight for Britain? Does it mean would you fight for Britain in a war if, you know, Starmer decided he wanted to go and invade, I don't know, Moldova? Or would we fight for Britain if someone came to invade us? You know, there's a lot of caveats here because you would, you know, the question of would you go fight for Britain somewhere abroad is actually would you join our armed forces? Because at this stage there is no legal compulsion that if a war starts somewhere abroad, that if you're not in the armed forces, you have to go and take part in it. Of course, that was different in the First and the Second World Wars. But the idea of would you fight for Britain, I interpreted that as would you defend your nation on its home soil? But I don't know, that's the problem with this sort of, you know, what we've got from this survey is it isn't actually clear. Because if it was, do you want to fight for Britain or would you fight for Britain, surely the better question is would you consider joining the armed forces? But no, I mean, Dan, look, really awful to hear about your cousin.
Alex, I'm 33 years old. I know I'm not an old man right now, but I'm feeling it at the moment. And I think if the UK was going to survive, I mean, I'm mixed race, so I know there's plenty of people who don't even see me as fully British, and I can't blame them for that. We're living in a country where just being patriotic gets it called a far-right bigot. And if tomorrow they said you'd have to fight for our country, I'd still serve up and I'd still fight for this country because I believe it's something worth fighting for. But would Starmer?
Yeah.
Would he honestly?
No, I know. I don't.
Have a good night.
Yeah, Dan, it's been really wonderful talking to you. Thank you ever so much for your really poignant call there in many respects. All right, let's squeeze in Mark, who's in Lincolnshire. Hi, Mark.
Hi there, Alex.
Hello.
Hiya. Yeah, it's just regarding Nigel Farage and his statement on I think he's on about up to 1 million going or something in his term in office if he gets into power.
Right.
And I have some issues with this, and it's all regarding language, because I see Nigel do this quite a lot. He seems to do it all the time, if I'm honest. If you actually examine what he actually says, there's some really open-ended words in that statement that he made.
Right.
One of them, so you've got, he's talking about, this is the quote, that we'll go back 5 years and review all asylum applications. If there is a belief those applications that have been granted are bogus, they're bogus, that's another word. So there's three words there that are quite open-ended, because he's not specifying what metric's going to be used to decide these things, whose claim is bogus. He's not specifying, who's reviewing these cases, under what basis.
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean. There's not really any detail, is there, in terms of review? Who's reviewing it? How many people are doing it? I mean, because that's a huge undertaking. If you're going to go and look back through, 400,000 applications of, asylum or whatever, and then review all of them, is AI going to do it? I mean, there's definitely a lot of meat we need on those bones.
Well, exactly, and he's talking about up to 1 million. Well, again, that doesn't really mean a great deal of anything. I mean, his previous immigration document, which I wouldn't necessarily call a policy personally, because when I look at policies, I'm expecting to see, legislative changes, and that kind of thing, maybe impact assessments, that kind of stuff. And I don't really see any of that from any of the policies that Reform put out.
I think, though, look, what I would say is this, and I've got to love you and leave you in a moment, Mark, because Phil Davies here chomping at the bit to get on with his show. What I would say, though, is there's no general election that's being called, and so giving mood music for what your ambition is, I think is perfectly acceptable at this point in time. When we then get into an election cycle and parties are campaigning, I fully expect parties to be able to give fully costed policies, explain the apparatus, the legal decisions that are going to be taken to make sure that those things can be delivered. I don't think we're quite at that stage yet, though, in terms of where we are electorally. But Mark, thank you ever so much for your call. Hello, Mr. Dave.
Hi, Ms. Phillips. How are you?
I'm all right. I really got my knickers in a twist early about Lord Hermer.
Yes,
I've been digging into this man
because
forever.
I can't wait to get my teeth in as well, to be honest. So I'm poised and raring because, traitor springs to mind.
Yeah. Traitor,
frankly.
Treason. I mean, I just think the whole Mandelson thing is shocking, but this is even worse. And this has been 2 years now. The man was directly appointed, not elected, and had this very, anyone could Google it and find the back catalogue of all the cases he took on. They're making that man Attorney General. Why is it taking 2 years for someone to actually go, let's talk about this?
Yeah, but we're talking about this chap who has gone after our war heroes. Yeah. And that to me is just unforgivable. I just can't believe that anyone thinks it is in any way remotely acceptable to go after those who fight